Chapter 86. Our Hogong. What did you say? Duan Wang succeeded the throne? Liang Shi stood in front of a black bricked farmhouse, face pale as she looked at her nephew. To her, the news was the worst possible. She muttered disbelievingly, "Why is it Duan Wang? What about Rui Wang?" Rui Wang? Liang Hong looked at Gumu's state inside. Rui Wang, due to making a fuss in Xindi's morning hall, caused everyone's dissatisfaction. Thankfully, the emperor was merciful and didn't punish him heavily, just sentenced him to kneel in the morning hall to reflect. Wasn't Rui Wang the most favored by Xindi? Why is it like this? Liang Shi staggered, and a beat later, she started to cry. Then what about Su'er? What should she do? Now that Rui Wang couldn't become the emperor, Su'er was still a Chia. What good life would she have in the future? Liang Hong saw how violently Gumu was crying and didn't know how to comfort her. In the beginning, he hadn't been in favor of Biao Mei becoming a Cheshire. Now that Rui Wang Fu had lost power, Biao Mei as a Cheshire, would she even have a comfortable life in the future? He looked at the brick farmhouse behind Gumu and couldn't help but think of the three Biao Mei of Changde Fu. The eldest Biao Mei married Duan Wang. Now that Duan Wang succeeded the throne, eldest Biao Mei was certainly going to become the empress. She had to wait for the immediate mourning period to pass before she could be formally titled. Heir Biao Mei might have been a Shu daughter, but after the Chu family fell, there was a prosperous Sui Kai that married her. In the end, it was San Biao Mei who had been birthed and raised by Gumu who became a shameful Chia. Was this all because Gu Fu disregarded everything in order to marry Gumu? Liang Hong took out a small pouch of silver. Gumu, our entire family is planning on moving back to the old home in Shijun. Take this silver. He saw Liang Shi standing woodenly and pushed the silver into her hands. Now that the new emperor is ascending to the throne, he would pardon some people. I already got someone to find out. Gu Fu will soon be released from the prison. When the time comes, you should try to live a good life. I will bid farewell to you here. He had lived in the Fu of the Chu family for a significant amount of time. Now that the entire family was leaving, the only thing he could leave behind was just this small pouch of silver. Biao Ji is leaving? Chu Wangji walked out of the room. He was wearing a dusty sackcloth robe, his hair disheveled. His overall appearance was very sorry. Liang Hong looked at the state of his Biao Di and with some pity, he raised his hands to bid. Goodbye, take care. Chu Wangji looked at the figure of Biao Ji as he left, the terror in his heart growing. By this time, even Biao Ji's family was moving away, and the Dajia who had been abused by his mother was going to become the empress. Would his family even be able to make a living? He suddenly felt resentment towards his mother. If mother had treated Dajia better, they wouldn't have fallen this low. Liang Shi looked with discontent in the direction of the imperial palace. When she turned and saw the sorry figure of her son, she couldn't breathe and fainted. Before entering the darkness, she saw her son's panicked and helpless eyes. By now, the Hogong was a mess. The consorts of Xindi all had to move out of the places they had been living in. It was fine for those who had been favored and had children. They only had to move towards the place in the Hogong for the Tai Fei. Those that didn't have children and weren't Fei could only move to a makeshift palace in the Jing suburbs to live out the rest of their lives. Chu Qingju looked at the list of Xindi's Tai Fei and took account. There were 20-something that held a position. Other than those of high position or had children, there were 12 who had to move to the outside palace. As to those who had been favored by Xindi but didn't have a position, according to the traditions, they were going to be sent to a monastery in the Jing suburbs to become nuns with no hope of leaving for the rest of their lives. Chu Qingju sighed and closed the list in her hand. According to the traditions, do the favored women have to be sent to the monastery? Qian Chang Xian looked at the list that Nyang Yang had folded up. He bowed as he replied, Nyang Yang, that was the usual method. However, it isn't required to send the women that had been favored into the monastery to become nuns. If that's the case, then arrange for these people to move to the auxiliary palace in the Jing suburbs. That palace might not be as comfortable as the imperial palace, but it would be better than a destitute monastery. Chu Qingju furrowed her brow as she continued, there will be more people, and even though it would mean more spending each year with only these women, it wouldn't be a big expenditure. A monastery with only nuns had no sources of income. Going there, it's the same as prison. As a woman, she didn't have the habit of making things difficult for other women. Qing the Emperor had ruled for several decades and only favored this number of women total. In this kind of era and dynasty, he really couldn't be considered to be lustful. Nyang is kind. Nukai will order for it to be carried out. Qianchang Xian received the list and took out a blueprint. Teihao Niang has already moved from Kuei-Yuan Palace to Chongning Palace. This is the blueprint for the renovation of Kuei-Yuan Palace. Does Nyang require any place to be changed? This Muho Huang Taiho III had moved out. The new owner was this person in front of him. Chu Qingju took the blueprints to take a look and became dizzy looking at the straight and perpendicular lines. She responded, "I'll look at the blueprints. It's not likely that there would be any major problems." Qianchang Xian didn't say anything and announced that the emperor was coming over for the evening meal before retreating. Chu Qingju stood at the window of the back hall of Tianqi Palace. She could see Kuei-Yuan Palace located in the same center meridian as Tianqi Palace. These two palaces were the only palaces that were constructed in the center. The two palaces were also the closest to each other, but the previous owners of these two palaces were like strangers, full of mutual respect between them, and until death there weren't any feelings. She had heard Jin Zhan narrate what had happened when Xindi had passed. Jin Zhan's storytelling abilities were good, and when she narrated, it was as though she was there. Because of that, Chu Qingju felt that it wasn't easy being a person in the Hogong. The Empress' calm intelligence, Xu Guifei's loss of composure, and Jing Guifei's heartbreaking grief, as well as when Guipin and Guipin who couldn't even enter the gate of Tianqi Palace. Qing the Emperor held Jing Guifei's hand when he died. Some said that he was smiling when he left. Chu Qingju didn't understand. Wasn't Qing the Emperor's true love Xu Guifei? But why, at the very end, he was only concerned with Jing Guifei? And that Chaner, for who was it? Jing Guifei or another woman? The day that Xindi was buried, Chu Qingju and he Hung wore mourning clothes as they guarded Qing the Emperor's corpse all the way to his tomb. And then it was kneeling west and kneeling east. When he Hung recited the lament, Chu Qingju knelt with the other people underneath as they sobbed. After the funeral finished, she felt that her legs weren't legs anymore and her eyes were a line. The hemp mourning clothes so wet, water could be wrung out. When she finally made it back to the palace, it was already deep in the night. Chu Qingju soaked in the bathtub until she felt herself be revitalized. When she just finished dressing, she saw He Hung walk in wearing a light-colored silk robe. When He Hung entered the room, he saw Chu Qingju look tired but wasn't harmed by the scorching sun, and his heart was relieved. He took the towel from Mu Jin's hand and started to dry Chu Qingju's wet hair for her. "It was hard for you these days," he sighed. "A few more days, and the people of the Fu have to be received. Their positions, do you have any thoughts?" According to protocol, other than the wife, the other women of the new emperor must wait at least 27 days after Xindi's passage before they could enter the palace. The official titles could only be bestowed after 3 months. But no matter what had to be arranged needed to be arranged. Even if they couldn't be instantly titled, but the rank they would receive and where they would live had to all be finalized. Chu Qingju snatched the cotton cloth from He Hang's hands, slowly rubbing her hair herself. "They are Emperor's Fei Pin. I can't decide." Seeing the other's distant eyes, He Hung felt slightly bitter inside. He sighed and pinned down the hand Chu Qingju was using to dry her hair. "They are just the Fei Pin in the Hogong. You are my empress, the woman who is going to accompany me my entire life. Naturally, you are the one to decide such matters." Chu Qingju suddenly smiled. She threw the towel to one side, looking at He Hung with a smile, asking, "Emperor, is that a promise?" Even though Chu Qingju's tone was joking as she said the words, but He Hung felt that the other was especially serious when she asked it. His heart shook, gazing at her as he solemnly nodded his head. He leaned over to kiss her forehead. "What I say is true." Chu Qingju silently lowered her face. Following that, her eyes changed and she smiled as she replied, "Since Emperor has said it, then I will decide the ranks of the women in the Hogong in the future." Since she had already decided to live each day like it was her last, she wouldn't change anything now. How long He Hung could tolerate her, that was how long she would run rampant. When it came to the day that He Hung couldn't tolerate her, the worst was just death, who never died since the beginning of time. It was just dying in pleasure or in hardship. Detecting that the other had strangely become energetic, He Hung didn't understand why she would change so fast, but that bit of dejection in his heart instantly disappeared. He smiled as he took up the towel to start drying Chu Qingju's hair again. Jiang Shi's birth might not compare to Feng Shi, but she is a very steady person and understands her bounds. Why don't we promote her to Fei and let her reside in Yuping Palace? Luo Shi is a few words but a docile person. She would be perfect for a third-grade Guipin. The first person to serve you is Han Shi. But since she was of low birth, how about she gets granted a fifth-grade Liangdi? As to Feng Shi, she has a good birth, but she was demoted to Shijie from Si Fei. I don't have any good feelings towards her. So, Emperor, you can decide her rank. Chu Qingju straightforwardly expressed her likes and dislikes. As to what He Hung thought, she was too lazy to care so much. He Hung truly didn't think Chu Qingju would blankly tell him that she didn't like a certain Shijie. Seeing her look as though she didn't care what he thought, his mood was light as he responded, "The others will do according to you. As to Feng Shi, since you don't like her and I don't like her, she'll be a 7th-grade Chiron. No matter what, she has been in the Fu for a significant amount of time. It wouldn't be appropriate if it was lower than 7th. As to He Hang's last sentence, which seemed like an explanation, Chu Qingju glanced at him from the corner of her eye. This is what Emperor decided. It has nothing to do with me. Didn't I say I didn't like her? It has nothing to do with you. He Hung touched her hair and found it was almost dry. He reluctantly stood. It's late, and you were out the whole day. Have an early rest. Because it was the hot morning period, they couldn't even spend much time together, even in private, much less have any relations. Chu Qingju smiled as she watched him leave the back hall. She reached to pluck at her hair, the smile on her lips becoming more evident. The 34th year of Qingde Emperor of the Long Dynasty, passed away. The second imperial son succeeded the throne. Because of Xiandi's death due to illness, the new emperor was struck with grief, indicating that for the year, the era name would still be kept as Qingde, and he would observe mourning for 3 years. His officials were moved by the emperor's filial piety, but due to the emperor's position being a busy yet honorable one, observing mourning for 3 years would damage the dragon's body and not beneficial to the country. So after the entire royal court pleaded numerous times, the new emperor finally agreed to substitute years with months and observe mourning for 3 months. Due to this matter, the new emperor spoke of his unfilial conduct and made atonements many times in the mourning hall of Xiandi and visited to light incense every day. His actions received the praises of the scholars in the world, and many wrote stories and told tales to express the filial piety of the new emperor. Regardless of what happened at royal court, 1 month after the passing of Xiandi, Chu Qingju finally sent the order to receive the Shijie of Duanwang Fu into the palace. Of course, other than He Hong and some of the personal servants, no one else knew that the positions of the Shijie weren't decided by the emperor, but decided by the empress. Consorts of a deceased emperor, is long, forever, is peaceful. 3 literally means Mother Empress, Grand Dowager Empress. For the first, Chan means beautiful. The second means cicada. Imperial consort, middle rank /n. Chapter 87. Stupidity. The master and mistress of Duanwang Fu might have already entered the palace, but there were still guards at this place. The people passing by knew that this compound was the home of the new emperor before he ascended the throne, and was extra careful as they passed by. By now, even the paternal families of the Cheshire of Duanwang Fu's status were elevated in status. Even though not many went to deliberately fawn over them, but they were now much more courteous. For the Cheshire of Duanwang Fu, the fact that Wang Yi succeeded the throne, it was a great and joyful surprise. How could the Shijie of a Wang Fu be compared to being in Yangyang in the palace? Even more so, they had served before the emperor ascended the throne, so their ranks wouldn't be very low. By that time, when the emperor wouldn't favor them, their ranks would still be passable enough that they would be written into the history books. If they were just Shijie of a Wang Fu, who would remember them after their death? But very quickly, their exhilaration disappeared. Wang Fei had been sent for to enter the palace the night the emperor entered. After that, no imperial decree came. Even though Xindi's body was sent to the tomb and the emperor held the ascension ceremony, still no one came to receive them to enter the palace. Feng Zijin and Han Qinghe were frantic inside. They discussed it before going together to find Jiang Yongyu. At this time, Jiang Yongyu held the highest position among them. But when the two went into Jiang Yongyu's residence, they stilled. The two of them had been burning with anxiety, but this one was sitting under the willow reading a book. A cup of cold tea was placed in front of her, a Yahuan fanning her from behind. She looked very idle. Feng Zijin, who had always looked down at her calm attitude, moved forward to comment. Jiang Sifei is really restrained. At this time, you still aren't anxious. Jiang Yongyu closed the book. She looked at the two. Mimi, please sit. Such a hot day. Why have you come to my place? The Yahuan brought over 2 stools to place behind the two of them. Han Qinghe was also impatient but knew that Feng Zijin's words were inappropriate. She gave her thanks, smiled and sat down. These days, Emperor and Yang both aren't in the Fu. I found it boring and thought to come to Jiejia's place to chat. Jiang Yongyu knew Han Shi was impatient about entering the palace. Even though her words were prettier than Feng Shi, her thoughts weren't any less than Feng Shi. She raised a teacup and responded. These are the tea leaves that Yang especially had someone deliver a few days before. With one sip, it keeps the heat away. Mimi should have a taste. Raising the teacup in front of her to take a sip, Han Qinghe felt that the tea was slightly bitter, but after swallowing, she really did feel the heat inside slightly dissipate. She put down the teacup, smiling and complimenting. The things that Yang has bestowed, it's really great. We can see how Yang cares for Jiejia. Of the 4 Shijia and the Wang Fu, Chu Qingju wasn't close to anyone, but she treated Jiang Yongyu slightly better. Thinking about it, Han Qinghe was slightly regretful. If she had copied Jiang Yongyu in the beginning and sided with Chu Qingju, then even if the emperor didn't favor her in the future, with the empress at her back, her days would be much better. Hearing the meaning in Han Shi's words that tried to flatter her, Jiang Yongyu gave a slight smile. Yang treats us all the same. Mimi must be joking. Finishing, she looked at Feng Zijin. Did Mimi also come here to chat with me? I'm not going to beat around the bush with you. I'll just ask, do you know when we are entering the palace? Feng Zijin didn't look at the tea on the table and impatiently waved the fan in her hand. Don't say anything false. Are we going to be ignored by Yang like this? The time we enter the palace, that's to be decided by Emperor and Yang. How could I know? Jiang Yongyu looked at the fan in Feng Zijin's hand. Painted on the fan were large blooms of red peonies. She curled her lips, remarking, by now, there must be many matters in the Hoyong. It hasn't been a month since the passing of Xindi. Both Emperor and Yang must be grieving. Should we try to add even more trouble for Emperor and Yang? Feng Zijin glanced at the smile on Jiang Yongyu's face, snorting. Jiang Sifei has great composure. Since that's the case, I'm leaving. She stood, sneering. If you're able, then don't enter the palace. Finishing, she rushed furiously out of the Sea Yuan. Han Qinghe gave a dry laugh as she held a teacup. She looked at Ping Jizin's shadow. Feng Yanyang's personality is still the same. Entering the palace with such a personality, there's more waiting for her. Jiang Yongyu was used to Feng Zijin's conduct and calmly turned to say, we are experienced people that have served at the emperor's side. Sooner or later someone will come receive us to enter the palace. There's nothing to be impatient about. Everything in the palace is changing. The mistresses of each palace have to move. We aren't the wife. Do we have the qualifications like Yang to enter the palace early? Jiejia is a rare, clear-headed person. Mimi has learned. Han Qinghe smiled as she responded. Yang is virtuous and will certainly arrange everything. She might have been the first woman to serve Wang Yi, but in front of Jiang Yongyu, she could only call her Jiejia. Thinking about how she would soon be entering the palace, she was apprehensive. She didn't know what rank the emperor would give her. She held the lowest position of the 4 at the moment, and her future position would be the lowest as well. Thinking about it that way, her excitement instantly halved. She remarked to Jiang Yongyu, between the 4 of us, my birth is the lowest. Even Luo Mimi had a juju that died at his post. I don't have anyone. She thought of her father's 8th grade position. It was an official position, but in reality, it couldn't even compare to the gatekeeper of the Wang Fu. Why does Mimi think that way? We all serve Emperor. Does the Emperor rank us according to our paternal families? Zhang Yong, you comforted. You can't think that way. Han Qing, he instantly realized. Nyang Nyang didn't even have a paternal family anymore. She couldn't say such things. Thinking quickly, she followed. It was me that strayed off the road. That's right. As long as people can think, there is no challenge that can't be overcome. When Jiang Yongyu finished speaking, she saw a steward of the Wang Fu run in, his full of joy. Seeing them, he came up and bowed, reporting, "Mistresses, the Emperor's imperial decree has come down. It's to receive all the Juzi to enter the palace." Zhang Yongyu counted the days. Today was the 32nd day since the passing of Xiandi. To enter the palace now, it was the perfect time. She looked in the direction of the imperial palace and sighed. She had packed everything and was just waiting for this imperial decree to come down. Because of the death of Xiandi and the succession of the new emperor as well as the good weather, no one tried to discuss He Hong with any matters. The only thing that made him unhappy was that at this time, there was an imperial censor at court who said that Chu Qingju's status wasn't fitting to be the empress. He sat with a grave expression while listening to the imperial censor's words. Then he smiled coldly and responded, "According to what you say, then all the men would abandon their wives if their wife's paternal family did something wrong. Then how is there, the chaff wife cannot be divorced? Or is it that, in the heart of imperial censor Qin, your wife can be voluntarily abandoned?" He slammed his hand down on the dragon chair, pointing angrily at the imperial censor, shouting, "Such a ruthless and unscrupulous person! How can you act as an imperial censor of my Dalong dynasty? If the imperial censors of the world were like you, my Dalong dynasty won't even have any virtues." Emperor. Imperial censor Qin didn't think the emperor would speak so severely. His legs softened and he knelt down. "Emperor, Wang Fei might be your wife, but she has such unprincipled elders. How can she mother the world? Is Qin Derin accusing my Tian family's daughter of being unprincipled?" He didn't seem to be able to believe it, that the emperor had decided to only have his niece as his only empress this entire life. "Virtuous son-in-law, shall we walk together?" Luo Chongqing smiled as he walked in front of Tian Jinku, reaching out to pat his shoulder. "Father-in-law first." Tian Jinku raised his hands and made a motion of request, dropping half a step behind Luo Chongqing. Luo Chongqing didn't persist with him. The two slowly left the great hall. He remarked, "I heard long ago that Nyang Nyang and Rue Wang Fei's relationship wasn't good. From the looks of it today, it really isn't a rumor." Tianjin could jerked his lips. Father-in-law is right. But the Qin family was too obvious and ham-fisted this time. He smiled happily. No matter what, the fact that the emperor would care for his niece so, his deceased sister could rest in peace. "Emperor," Qian Changexine looked at the terrible expression on the emperor's face and cautiously held out a cup of tea. "Qin sure." He Hung pushed the teacup to throw the tea back, declaring, "It seems that there still isn't enough people serving in Zhan Sandi's Fu. /n. Chapter 88. Crowned Empress. Several plain carriages entered through the side door of the imperial palace's main gates. The guards protecting the doors watched as the carriages slowly moved away. This procession, compared to when the Empress Nyang had came into the palace, was drastically lacking. Right now, the emperor hadn't officially crowned the empress, but due to the fuss at royal court, who in the palace didn't know that Chu Shi was the unofficial empress. They didn't know how many palace maids in Taijian in the Department of Household Affairs were currently breaking their backs trying to get a chance to serve the empress. It was a pity that the emperor had personally picked the servants for empress. Just the amount of care that the emperor was taking was enough to let everyone in the palace understand very clearly that, in the heart of the emperor, those shirtier of Duan Wang Fu added up together couldn't even compare to one finger of the empress. "Stop!" The long, thin voice of a Taijian sounded from outside the carriage. The carriages simultaneously stopped. The Taijian in command looked at the carriages behind him and announced in a loud voice, "Please, mistresses, get off the carriage and proceed to the step carriage." Zhang Yongyu held Ai Lu's hand to get off the carriage. She saw that there were 4-step carriages not too far away, one of which was grander than the others. Before she could react, the Taijian who had been speaking walked in front of her, smiling as he greeted. Greetings to Nyang. Nukai is Yuping Palace's chief steward He Shou. Please, come this way. He reached out his arm to usher Zhang Yongyu to the finest step carriage. As she supported Zhang Yongyu, Ai Lu's heart leapt in joy. This Taijian dared to call her Mistress Nyang. Didn't that mean the emperor was going to give her mistress a high rank? After Zhang Yongyu settled on the step carriage, the Taijian raised a hand up. He didn't care about the other three and walked away with Zhang Yongyu. After Zhang Yongyu's step carriage started moving, another Taijian came up to call the other women and ushered them onto the remaining step carriages to follow behind Zhang Yongyu. These Shurchia had to first greet the empress after entering the palace. After they traveled a certain distance, near the back hall of Tianqi Palace, the step carriages were lowered and the 4 had to proceed on foot. He Shou walked to the entrance of the back hall and said to the Taijian guarding the door, "The people of Duan Wang Fu have been received into the palace. Can I trouble Gong to report?" The Taijian guarding the door wasn't as highly ranked as He Shou, but his post was at Tianqi Palace. He saw that He Shou was very polite and naturally didn't make it difficult for him. He raised his hands to He Shou. "So it's He Gong. Please wait, this one will go in to ask." Thanks. The smile of He Shou's face became even friendlier. Seeing the other go in to investigate, he turned to walk next to Zhang Yongyu, informing in a small voice, Nyang. Because the renovations of Kuei-Yuan Palace are quite extensive, the Empress is temporarily living in the back hall of Tianqi Palace. The Yuping Palace you will live in isn't far from Kuei-Yuan, so it is very convenient for you to give morning greetings to the Empress in the future. Zhang Yongyu realized why this one called He Shou was the chief Taijian steward in her palace. She quickly examined him. Seeing his conduct and awareness of boundaries, he didn't seem stupid. She nodded. The Empress is of the highest position. It's natural that it would take more effort to renovate her residence. He Shou gave a smile, releasing a breath inside. Originally, he was worried that he would have to serve a stupid mistress. Taking a closer look now, this one was a smart person indeed. She should be one. Out of the 4 Shurchia, only she was made of Fei. Even her residence was the Yuping Palace, which wasn't far from Kuei-Yuan Palace. That, at least, made it clear that the Empress was closest to her. It wasn't clear whether the Emperor liked her or not. But if even the Empress didn't like her, how would he live in the future? Feng Zijin stood behind Zhang Yongyu, her expression ugly. From entering the palace until now, these people were overly and secretly flattering Zhang Yongyu. Was it that she would be the highest ranked out of the 4 of them in the future? She had the highest birth of the 4, but why was the highest now Zhang Yongyu? Luo Yinxiu and Han Qing he docilely stood nearby. They didn't dare to even raise their heads to look at the door to the back hall, and just waited for the Empress' summons. The 4 stood for a while before the Taijian who had been guarding the door came out. His face was full of smiles as he announced, "The Empress invites Zhuzi inside, please." Jin Zhan came out and bowed to the 4 people. "Honorable mistresses, please follow newbie." "Thank you for your trouble, Jin Zhan Gunyang." Zhang Yongyu smiled at her and lifted her foot to start walking towards the inside. "Newbie is not worthy." Jin Zhan retreated to the side and made an inviting motion, ushering the 4 inside the hall. Nyang, the honorable mistresses have come, Huang Yang reported in a small voice. By now, everyone in the other parts of the palace called Chu Qingju the Empress, but the people who attended Chu Qingju still called her Nyang. That was because it hadn't formally come down, so it was inappropriate to call her Empress. Chu Qingju opened her sleepy eyes and saw the 4 walking in. They simultaneously knelt down, did a 3-bow, 9 full greeting. Chu Qingju kept her face up as she was bowed to by the 4 of them. After they finished, she gave them each a seat. She examined the 4 women. They were dressed tastefully. It seemed they had put some effort in their appearances to enter the palace. "It's been a long time since we saw each other. Is everyone fine?" Chu Qingju raised a teacup to take a sip, slowly waving the fan in her hand. "We wanted to welcome you into the palace earlier, but there were several reasons for the delay." One was that the residences hadn't been prepared, and the second was that it hadn't been long after the passing of Xindi. A few delays and the days became more than a month. Thanks, Nyang Nyang, for thinking of us. Pinky is perfectly fine, Zhang Yongyu answered. It's just that Pinky were all worried about Nyang Nyang, who was tired by the affairs of running the Hogong. So we didn't send any messages to you. After seeing you today, it does seem that Empress is thinner. It was a lie that Chu Qingju was thinner, but since she was wearing a white robe, she did seem weaker than she usually did in the Fu. Zhang Yongyu secretly examined the other. She didn't know if it was her false perception, but she felt that the Empress' appearance had changed from when she had just married into the Fu. But after thinking about her silent and dull personality when the Empress had just married, she attributed the changes to her dressing differently. Appearances originated from the heart. The core had been changed, so there were some changes in looks. Chu Qingju had looked at herself in the mirror and hadn't found much of a difference. She smiled and responded, "It must be that more sweat flowed under the hot weather of the summer which has caused the thinning." That's so true. This summer is the hardest to endure. Han Qing he carefully took over. Nyang Yang also has to take care of the numerous matters of Hogong. How would you not thin? Not long after they came in, they saw He Hung walk in wearing a soft brocade robe embroidered with dragons. He walked very quickly, not looking at the Shurchia sitting to the side, and raised the cup that Chu Qingju had been drinking tea from to take a mouthful. Then he sat down on the other chair at the front. The days are becoming hotter. Just coming in from the front hall was a struggle. Greetings to Emperor. Zhang Yongyu and the others hastily stood and bowed. If He Hung didn't call for them to stand, they didn't dare straighten. You entered the palace today? He Hung glanced casually over the four people. He frowned slightly. Since you have finished the greetings, return to your residences. He waves his hands, clearly not wanting too many people to remain here. Chia asks to be excused. Zhang Yongyu and the others bowed and left. Coming out of the doors to the back hall, they saw some Taijian holding long bamboo sticks with a cloth bag catching summer cicadas. They couldn't help but ask, "What are you doing?" He Shou, who had been waiting outside, quickly answered. Just now when the emperor came, he heard the sounds of the cicadas and said that the empress hadn't rested properly these days. He ordered the servants to drive away the cicadas so the empress could take a good noon nap. Zhang Yongyu looked at the scattering cicadas. No wonder the emperor was in a hurry to send them away. He had been annoyed with them for disturbing the empress' noon nap. Walking at the back, Feng Zijin jerked her mouth but didn't dare say anything. She felt that the care that the emperor took with Chu Qingju was becoming over the top. On the second day, after the Shurchia entered the palace, He Hung sent down the decree which bestowed the titles for the Hogong. The Empress of Xindi was made Mu Ho Huang Tai Ho, i.e., and was to reside in the eastern Chongning Palace. He Heng's birth mother Jing Guifei was made Sheng Mu Huang Tai Ho, and her residence was the western Fu Shou 3 Palace. Then Gui Pin was promoted to Gui Taifei, Shu Guifei to Gui Taifei. According to the old traditions, both could be received by their sons to live outside the palace. The other Feipin of Xindi were also promoted, but some had to move to the auxiliary palace, while others stayed in the palace. Zhan's wife Chu Shi, praised by Xindi to be full of good fortune, to be especially decreed in marriage to Zhen. Chu Shi entered the Fu at 15 years, gentle, excellent and perceptive, kind and virtuous, spirited and elegant, peerlessly intelligent, a rarity in the world. She serves Zhen personally in all matters, and is the epitome of a woman and the mother to the world. Zhen has such a wife. It is the blessing of the heavens. Today, this decree is sent to the world to crown her as the mother of the world. By the emperor, this imperial decree, which later historians believe it to be evidence of the great love He Hung held for his empress, was recited like so in front of all the officials. After one recitation at court, they had to recite it again in front of the empress. Afterwards, the imperial astronomers calculated an auspicious time to proceed with the full crowning ceremony for her to receive the gold seal and gold book before it was truly over. When Chu Qingju heard the first-rank palace maid recite the imperial decree crowning her empress in Tianqi Palace, she was suspicious that this wasn't really a decree crowning her empress, but a love letter that He Hung wrote to her and broadcasted it to the world. What was spirited and elegant, peerlessly intelligent, a rarity in the world. And that Jean has such a wife. It is the blessing of the heavens? Had he never heard a phrase called, "Show your love, die even quicker"? Congratulations, Empress. Congratulations, Empress. The palace personnel in the room all gave their congratulations, the smile on their faces even brighter than Chu Qingju's. With both hands, she took the imperial decree from the female official before she stood. Chu Qingju looked at the imperial decree in her hands. She knew He Heng's writing. The words on this imperial decree had been personally written by He Heng, and not by the imperial assistant. Congratulations, Empress. The female official performed a full greeting to Chu Qingju. Chu Qingju let someone reward the female official. After the official left, she saw the servants in the room were all brimming with joy and remarked, "Why is it that you are all happier than I am?" Mu Jin bent slightly as she replied, "Empress' happy occasion is newbie's good occasion. Why wouldn't newbie be happy?" Chu Qingju smiled as she shook her head. She rewarded everyone in the back hall who had served her. After the people that had nothing to do all left, she read the imperial decree in her hand again. A long time later, she sighed, "Mu Jin, lock it up." In Zhua Jing's eye, Feng Zijin looked in disbelief at the imperial decree in her hand. She couldn't believe that the emperor only made her a small minor 7th-grade Chiron. By the mandate of heaven, the emperor has spoken. The daughter of the Feng clan served Zhan in the house. Today, is made a Chiron and given the title Ping for? Ping, what sort of title was this? After the better part of an hour, Chun Yu, who went out to gather news, came back. Feng Zijin put down the imperial decree in her hands, asking, "Did you find out what the other people's ranks are?" Chun Yu trembled and shrank into her shoulders as she responded, "Zhuzi, newbie." Newbie found out. Zhang Xifei was promoted to Hong Vi Fei. Luo Yinyang promoted to Gui Pin. Han Yinyang was promoted to Liangdi. Even Han Qin, he was given a 5th-grade Longdi. Feng Zijin's face paled, and she fell back into her chair. She looked dispiritedly at the imperial decree on the table. Did the emperor dislike her this much? I, Mother Empress Grand Empress Dowager, Holy Mother Grand Empress Dowager 3. Happiness and longevity 4. Means peaceful, flat, calm. V. Worthy, virtuous /n. Chapter 89. The new Kuei Yuan Palace. After the people of the Hogong were titled, it was then time to give new titles to those who did service in the royal court. Of course, these new titles weren't like cheap lettuce that everyone could get a bite of. The first ones to be rewarded were the clans of the 2 empress dowagers in the 2 palaces. The paternal clans were all people of leisure. So He Hung only bestowed a noble title, full of glory but no real power. And then it was senior officials who served He Hung. They were promoted and bestowed things. As for the people who had sided with He Yuan, sorry, go stand to one side. It's a miracle that you were being demoted. Of all of the rewards, the most spectacular one was given to Tianjin Ku. His family already had a hereditary marquis title, but in Jing, where marquises were everywhere, his present position had all been due to his own efforts. Now the emperor waved his hand and made his hereditary marquis elevated to a hereditary first-rank duke and bestowed the title Zhong Yi. He also rewarded down 5,000 taels of silver to the Duke of Zhong Yi to construct the compound and generously personally wrote Zhong Yi Gong Fu on the plaque for the compound to bestow upon Tianjin Ku. His imperial favor was enormous. Zhong, it was naturally referring to his loyalty to the emperor. As for Yi, some thought that it was the emperor remembering the care Tianjin Ku gave to the empress as well as his call for justice for his sister, Tianshi, so he was given the character Yi. When they compared the honored Duke of Zhong Yi to the fallen Chu family, many sighed. It could be seen that people had to accumulate virtue. Karma really did come back to bite you. The Duke of Zhong Yi might not have a good daughter, but he had a good niece. That was his life. They could only admire it. When Chu Qingju heard He Hong had elevated her Jujio to first-rank Duke of Zhong Yi, she wasn't surprised. She had earlier detected that He Hong admired Jiujiu and clearly enjoyed his personal conduct. Now that he was in power, he needed people like Juju to work for him. Rather than saying that he was rewarding Juju, it was better to say that he was telling the world just how much he admired talented people who were loyal to the throne. Ming-He entered the back hall and bowed in front of Chu Qingju, mentioning Kuei-Yuan Palace that was still in the process of renovation. Empress, the construction of Kuei-Yuan Palace is almost done. Why don't you take a look to see if there are any places that are not to your liking, so it could be changed. Then the decorations can be moved in. The renovation of Kuei-Yuan Palace was the biggest project in Hogong. Over the past month, there were 3 shifts of people working day and night in order to renovate the palace according to the blueprints. Because they were afraid that the new paint would crack since it was being applied in the summer, blocks of ice were specially placed in all the areas a few days before painting commenced. It was obvious the amount of importance the emperor had placed on this matter. Chu Qingju looked at the sky outside. Today was shady and it wouldn't be too sunny to go outside. Ming-He must have deliberately picked this kind of weather before he opened to speak. She nodded, responding, "Today there is a lot of shade. It will be good to take a walk. It's been suffocating for Ben Gong to stay inside all day." Because Tianqi Palace and Kuei-Yuan Palace were very close, Chu Qingju didn't ride the phoenix carriage. She, along with her entourage, walked on the main road of the palace that led straight to Kuei-Yuan Palace. As she entered the palace, she found that the inside was quite different to when she had first seen Kuei-Yuan Palace. At that time, Kuei-Yuan Palace had been spacious but felt quiet. Also, at that time, she had only been a Wang Fei who was going to see the empress. Now, she was the owner of this palace. The attitude wasn't the same. The house, the garden, and the trees in her view had already been meticulously turned over, so that when one entered, it would look tasteful yet bright. This was the so-called easy on the eyes. The flowers, grasses, and the fake mountain in the outside gardens were in the Jiangnan style, so that from a glance, it would feel extremely elegant. Inside was the main hall. The doors and windows of the main hall were all new. A dragon and phoenix were carved on the door, and other designs had been carefully chosen for the windows. The main hall was the place where Chu Qingju would live. She found that every part of the main hall was in great taste, and she could see just how much effort the designer had put in. She couldn't pick out any place that was lacking. Ming-He saw the empress wearing a satisfied expression and spoke. The emperor heard that some paints are damaging to the body and specially ordered them to use paints made from natural materials. Empress, take a sniff. The paints all have a fragrance. When Chu Qingju entered the room, she had detected a faint fragrance. Hearing Ming-He's words, she smiled, responding, "The emperor took a lot of trouble." The emperor said that it's all good as long as the empress likes it. Ming-He retreated a step to the side. "Nyang, please follow Nukai to the western side hall for a look." When the door of the western side hall was opened, Chu Qingju was stunned, because inside was a very large white jade bath. On all 4 sides of the bath, there were 2 dragon heads. The wide gaping maws of the dragon clearly were the places for introducing the water. Beside the bath was a place enclosed in silk coverings. To the back hall, he strode quickly towards the outside, clearly not caring that it was going to rain soon. Ming-He and a bunch of younger Taijian held lanterns that were protected from the wind as they followed. He looked at the sky and saw another flash of lightning. A rainstorm was most likely going to come down this night. He looked at the emperor's slightly rushed figure. Was the emperor worried that the empress was afraid of thunder? Zhong is loyal, devoted. Yi is friendship, justice, righteousness /n. Chapter 90. The Composure of a Queen. When the first roar of thunder occurred, Chu Qingju had started consuming her evening meal at the table. Because she had toured Kuei-Yuan Palace in the afternoon, she had taken a nap when she got back. When she woke up, the evening meal had to be delayed. The mushroom slice she had in her chopsticks almost fell to the table. She listened to the roar of wind outside and put down her chopsticks, frowning as she asked, "It's going to rain?" "It must be." Mu Jin and some of the other palace maids firmly shut the windows in the hall. She walked next to Chu Qingju to gently fan her. There wasn't any sunshine today, but it was humid. It's not strange that thunder will occur. Chu Qingju nodded. The common people liked to use the days of the 6th month to describe a baby's face. It could be seen just how quickly the summer weather had changed. This moment, it was raining. The next, the sun could come out. She picked up her chopsticks again. When she just picked up a piece of tofu, there was another clap of thunder. But her adaptive abilities were high, and she calmly placed the tofu into her mouth. A short time later, she heard the sound of rain falling. From the sound, the rain seemed very heavy. If someone was walking around the outside corridors at the moment, with that wind and the rain, they would definitely become a drowned rat. The hand that Mu Jin was holding a fan with stopped moving. She looked in surprise when the emperor, drenched in water, appeared at the doorway. She retreated to one side and with the other servants, knelt down. Emperor. Chu Qingju put down the chopsticks in her hands. She walked quickly to Yi Hong and touched his soaked clothing. Turning, and from a quick-witted Jin Zhan, she took a cotton cloth, wiping him down as she led him towards the inner room. Such heavy rain. From the front hall to here, it's an entire circle around. What are you doing coming now? As she reproached, she reached out to take down the dragon and pearl coronet in He Heng's hair. She took out a clean robe and reached to untie the other's belt. He Heng looked at the palace maids and Tai Jian that had followed in and used his eyes to order them to leave. He turned, smiling as he explained. I just heard the thunder and was worried you would be afraid. Just wanted to take a look, but didn't expect that the rain would come down halfway. With this weather, the rain comes down whenever it wants. There's so many people keeping me company, I won't get scared. Running out like this, it makes people worry. Chu Qingju peeled off his clothing and poked at the muscles on his chest. How are the servants attending you? Don't they know to have an umbrella to block the rain for you? He Heng smiled. He didn't say that he left so abruptly that the servants didn't have the time to prepare. He gathered the other in his embrace, the muscles on his chest feeling her warm breath. Just a few drops of rain, it's nothing. Chu Qingju glared at him and pinched at his waist. Change first. Helplessly releasing the person in his arms, He Heng stripped himself bare in front of Chu Qingju. Seeing her teasing look as she examined him up and down, he asked, What is it? Chu Qingju rubbed her chin, and then came forward to caress his muscles. Such a handsome beauty, why don't you let Xiaoyi have a kiss? If you follow Xiaoyi, you'll get to drink and eat well. Finishing, she went on tiptoes to kiss He Heng's chin and then quickly stepped back. She saw He Heng's little brother stand up spiritedly. Standing up this easily? Chu Qingju raised an eyebrow and smiled as she took another step back. In a regretful voice, she said, It's hot morning right now. This servant has no way to serve Emperor. Such a pity. Finishing, she pretended to wipe her tears away. He Heng took a large step forward and captured the other in his arms. He turned and put her down on the large bed, fiercely pressing down on Chu Qingju and kissing multiple times before panting as he declared, People say the fox spirits enchant people, yet I didn't know what was a fox spirit. Today, I know that one as tempting as Chu Qingju is a fox spirit. Finishing, his hand rubbed at Chu Qingju's chest, smiling as he teased, Is beauty happy with the service of Xiaoyi? Chu Qingju reached to slide her hand from He Heng's shoulders to his waist, the tip of her tongue swiping across the corner of her mouth. Why is beauty so eager and so naked to throw yourself into an embrace? It's really making Xiaoyi embarrassed. He Heng's entire body was burning from Chu Qingju's actions. His hands pulled and he spent a long time on her body before in a raspy voice, he promised. After these 3 months, watch how I sort you out. Finishing, he pulled her hand and slowly moved it down. In the end, He Heng finally extinguished the fire with Chu Qingju's help. He pulled a blanket to wrap around the two of them, his nose rubbing at Chu Qingju's fragrant and smooth shoulder. Hearing the rain outside, he said, With Qingju, I feel that all the women in the world are just so. 1,000 of them cannot compare to one of Qingju. Chu Qingju smiled as she wrapped an arm around his neck, permitting him to play around at her chest, but she didn't speak. After He Heng ascended the throne, except in front of outsiders, he had never called himself Zhan in private with her. His attitude towards her was the same as when they had been at Duan Wang Fu, and it was even more intimate now. She wasn't a cynic, so she wouldn't retreat out of fear because of He Hong's attitude. From a certain perspective, she enjoyed the good He Hong gave her, and she would return the same to He Hong. If He Hong really had feelings towards her, she would be delighted. If He Hong had no feelings for her, she wouldn't be heartbroken. And she had the confidence that before she would die in exhilaration, she would dig a hole for He Hong. Love wasn't essential in life, but if there was love to flavor her life, she wouldn't reject enjoying it. In the novels, the women tortured themselves because of love. But she wasn't the female protagonist. She didn't have to walk the road they did. She wasn't even scared of death. Would she be scared of this thing called love? Chu Qingju smiled coquettishly. Her right hand moved up and down his back. Just when He Hong became totally distracted, she kicked He Hong aside, grabbing He Hong's robe to wrap around her body and flipped off the bed. She stood beside the bed, looking from high up down at He Hong. The fact that the emperor could say such things, it's that you have seen 1,000 ships. But it's a pity that Xia only has emperor as the only man and doesn't know which man is better. So sorry to disappoint. He Hong had suffered a kick from Chu Qingju, but he couldn't find one bit of anger. He sat up against the headboard, looking at Chu Qingju, who had a raised chin and narrowed eyes, and laughed out loud. Why was it that when Chu Qingju was clearly wearing his robe, but he felt she was still inexplicably attractive? He Hong didn't know that the thing that attracted him, it had a special name. It was the composure of a queen. The palace attendants outside heard the laughter of the emperor coming from inside the room. Their expressions didn't change. They had never seen the emperor come and be in a bad mood when he left. By midnight, the thunder had stopped, but there was still a shower of rain. He Hong took advantage of the light from the night luminous pearls to look at Chu Qingju, who was deeply asleep. He quietly and softly made his way out of the bed. When he put on the robe, he found from the pile of clothing the pouch that Chu Qingju had embroidered for him, and didn't even tie his hair before quietly leaving the inner room. Ming He, who had been waiting outside, saw the emperor was holding his socks and shoes as he walked out barefoot. He quickly knelt in front of the emperor to help him put on his socks and shoes before asking in a small voice, "Emperor, return to the palace now?" Right now, it was the hot morning period. If the emperor stayed for the whole night at the empress residence, even if no one dared to say anything, it still wouldn't look good. And He Hong nodded. He looked behind him and left with his attendants. Inside the room, Chu Qingju was sleeping happily. After finishing the matter of Duan Wang Fu's Shirchia, Chu Qingju finally had the time to go to the 2 palaces of the 2 dowager empresses to sit. The past few days, she had made her greetings before leaving. Now that her title was established and she had finished off much of the matters in the Hogong, it was time to exchange feelings with the 2 popo. Muhu Empress Dowager wasn't very chatty. She spoke with Chu Qingju for a short while before letting Chu Qingju leave to rest. On the second day, Chu Qingju headed towards the residence of Shangmu Empress Dowager. Empress Dowager Wei's Fu Shou Palace was on the western side of the palace. Chu Qingju had to travel for a significant period of time on the Phoenix carriage until she reached the gates of Fu Shou Palace. From the names of the palaces for the 2 Empress Dowagers, it was possible to see the emperor's intentions. Muhu Empress Dowager had eternal and peace. When it got to Shangmu Empress Dowager, it was good fortune and long life. It could be seen that the best children were your own. Coming into Fu Shou Palace, Wei Empress Dowager got Chu Qingju to sit. Her treatment of Chu Qingju hadn't changed. Even when she mentioned He Hong's announcing of crowning her empress that was more like a love letter, Wei Empress Dowager wasn't unhappy, just smiled and said, "After Ijia, I heard the imperial decree. It caused Ijia to laugh for a long time. The emperor set his heart on you. That's a good thing." She sighed. "Don't think too much. Ijia knows you are a good child. If there is someone stupid in this Hogong, you are the mistress of this Hogong. Just severely punish them." This was blankly telling Chu Qingju she wasn't going to touch the affairs of the Hogong. This gave Chu Qingju a new understanding of her popo. According to the old ways, after a woman, riding on the success of her son, became the Empress Dowager, she would try to enjoy the taste of being high up, But why was her popo worried for her like she wouldn't be able to control the Hogong? Muho, don't worry, Urxi understands. She looked at the surroundings and found that the decorations were not brightly colored due to the morning person, but they were finer than the original Zhongjing Palace. Does Muo have any place that needs something to be added? Urxi will get them to do it immediately. With you and the Emperor on top, Aijiao won't lack for anything here. Whenever something good comes out of the Department of Internal Affairs, you and Emperor always rush to let them deliver it to Aijia's here. If you get them to send more, there would be no room in this palace. Empress Dowager Wei smiled and patted her hand. If you have any idle time in the future, come more often to sit at Aijia's palace. Any other things, Aijia would have more than you. Empress Dowager Wei was speaking the truth. She was the Emperor's mother. The Emperor was a filial son. The Empress wasn't an Urxi that would oppose her at every point. Every day, she was being fawned over by the Taifei. She occasionally would summon Shu Taifei to chat about life realizations. If there was time, she would summon the artists from the palace department to tell stories to her. Her days were very comfortable. What she wanted had all came true. Her son was the emperor. She had a good relationship with her Urxi. She didn't want to be a female emperor, trying to fight for the control of the Hogong with her Urxi rather than living her good days. Was she stupid? Even more, there were two empress dowagers in this palace. If she entered into the affairs of the Hogong, the other Empress Dowager would naturally have reason to enter. Her own son's harem, would she let others meddle? So Empress Dowager Wei felt it was good right now. Nothing had to change. Chu Qingju managed to bum off a noon meal off of Empress Dowager Wei. The Poxy also talked about the events of He Heng's childhood before she left in satisfaction. Walking out of Fu Shou Palace, Chu Qingju said to Mu Jin, "Mu Hu is probably the woman I admire the most. This kind of woman, in any place, was worthy of admiration. The only pity was that she didn't meet a good man." Mu Jin knew that the Muhu the Empress meant was Shangmu Empress Dowager. As a palace maid, she couldn't comment, but she agreed in her heart. She was also relieved. If Shangmu Empress Dowager liked to control everything in the Hogong, it would be very worrisome. When the Phoenix carriage passed the Imperial Gardens, Chu Qingju unexpectedly found He Hong was standing beside the lotus pond, kneeling in front of him as a young girl dressed in a green girdled dress. Her brows furrowing, Chu Qingju indicated for the Phoenix carriage to stop. Mu Jin looked towards the lotus pond, her brows also furrowing. Was that one of the female candidates left over by Shindy? In the beginning, they had picked a few hundred candidates to enter the palace from across the country. In the end, only 20-something people had remained. But after Shindy passed, the candidates could only live in Tuanfang Hall and couldn't move freely. Running to the Imperial Gardens, that was breaking protocol. Chu Qingju stepped down the carriage, smiling as she said, "Mu Jin, let's go take a look." Yes, Mu Jin carefully held the Emperor's hand, and the palace maids and Taijian followed behind. He Heng's face was so dark, ink could be squeezed out. He was going to speak, but saw Chu Qingju heading in his direction. His expression changed slightly, and he took a step back to increase the distance from the kneeling candidate. Qian Changexine reported in a small voice, "Emperor, Empress is coming over." Jin knows. He Hung glared at him. "Stop blabbing." Qian Changexine silently lowered his head and started to examine the patterns on the Emperor's shoes. The expression of the girl kneeling on the ground changed, and she buried her head deeper. Literally grieving person, how Empress Dowagers refer to themselves. Chapter 91. Who can compare to my man? Chu Qingju walked over to He Hong and, not looking at the female candidate at the side, and acted to bow. She was stopped by He Hong, who put his hand out and pulled her to stand under the shade of the roof. "Just now, Zhen was going to the back hall to see you, and heard you went to Muhu's place. Is Muhu fine these past days?" "Everything about Muhu is well." Chu Qingju held up a fan and started waving it, moving her hand towards He Hong so that both would feel the breeze. "Muhu has said for us to go to her residence to eat. She's always thinking of you. Since that's the case, then tomorrow, we'll go together to Fu Shou Palace for the noon meal." He Hong then pointed at the girl kneeling on the ground, his voice becoming cold. "Do you know this candidate?" Chu Qingju followed and turned her body. She saw the candidate's head was lowered and ordered. Raise your head. The candidate was hesitant to raise her head. A Taijian behind her pinched her chin to lift it up. Her eyes were flitting around, afraid to look straight at Chu Qingju. She frowned. Chu Qingju did have the memories of the previous Chu Qingju's life, but much of the time, she wouldn't deliberately flip through the original's memories. Seeing the girl now, she remembered some unhappy events. She said coldly, "Isn't this Wei Gunyang? Just 2 years, Wei Gunyang has become more beautiful." This girl was Chu Lao Tai-Tai's paternal family's grandniece. She had once stayed for a time in Changdagong Fu and had a good relationship with Chu Yusu. If she had the time, she liked to jeer at the original. Was her name Wei Jing or Wei Zhu? Candidate Wei Zhu greets Empress. When the Taijian released Wei Zhu's chin, she instantly leaned down on the ground, clearly very afraid that Chu Qingju would settle old scores. Didn't think Jiogong would willingly send you into the palace? Chu Qingju gave a yawn, lazily waving the fan in her hand. Right now, the Xuanu should be living in Tuanfang Hall. How did you get here? When she finished speaking, she saw Wei Zhu's shoulders start to tremble. Originally, she had been bored, but she was now intrigued. She turned to look at He Hung beside her. "Emperor, how did this Wei Gunyang encounter you?" He Hung saw the mockery in her eyes and smiled helplessly. He narrated, "Zhen waited a long time for you, but you didn't return, so Zhen decided to greet Muhu, who knew that Zhen would encounter such a bold and disrespectful candidate, who dared to slander Empress in front of Zhen." "Oh." Chu Qingju gave a small smile as she watched the trembling of Wei Zhu's shoulders increase. What good matter of Bin Gong did Wei Gunyang speak of? Wei Zhu was frightened. Originally, she was indignant that, the kind of woman that Chu Qingju was, became the empress, who knew that after saying a few words, the emperor became angry. Seeing Chu Qingju's powerful composure so different than in the past, she was so frightened she couldn't speak. If Wei Gunyang doesn't want to say, Bin Gong won't force you. Come, empress, do you remember 2 years ago? Wei Zhu raised her head and resignedly spoke. At that time, Grand Aunt and Chan Nu's grandfather made a spoken promise. Do you still have an impression? Qian Changxian heard the words and motioned for the palace attendants to all leave, leaving behind the personal attendants of the emperor and empress. He didn't know if this candidate would be crazy and say something. Since the emperor and empress didn't call for her to shut up, he could only not let the servants hear. Do you mean 2 years ago when grandmother and great-uncle had the intentions for Bin Gong to be engaged to your brother? Chu Qingju was very unrestrained. She waved her hand and stared at Wei Zhu like she was looking at an idiot, her voice surprised as she said, Bin Gong has such a good husband as the emperor. How would Bin Gong remember those unfounded matters? Right, what is your brother called? My dear empress, how could you just say it? What would the emperor think? Mu Jin nervously looked at the emperor. The result was that she only saw a satisfied smile on the emperor's face. She was confused. Did something she didn't know happen? Even though he was slightly furious when he heard that the Chu family wanted to marry Chu Qingju into the Wei family, but He Hung was very quickly soothed by Chu Qingju's words. Those words were right. With such a good man as him, what were other men worth? Even more, the engagement between Qingju and the Wei family was only mentioned and hadn't been finalized. He wasn't as extreme to blame Qingju for such a minor matter. According to the attitude of the Chu family towards Qingju, he didn't believe that Chu Lao Tai was really thinking for Qingju. Thinking about the rich dowry that Chu Qingju had when she married into the Wang Fu, He Hung smiled coldly. They were definitely conspiring for the dowry that Tian Shi had left behind for Qingju. Thinking about it, he glared coldly at Wei Zhu kneeling on the ground. Such nonsense. You dare slander the empress. Such recklessness. Wei Zhu heard the discontent in the emperor's words and quickly continued, Emperor, please investigate thoroughly. This subject's words are all true. If Shindi didn't decree the marriage, Great Aunt would have agreed to the Wei family's proposal. Since the engagement wasn't made, it naturally means that it was the will of heaven that Zhen and Empress should be together. To mention these matters deliberately in front of Zhen, are you trying to ruin Empress' reputation? He Heng's voice became darker, harshly proclaiming, the daughter of the Wei clan is of an improper family, and lacking in protocol. Past Zhen's decree, the members of the imperial house of the Long dynasty are not allowed to take the daughters of the Wei clan as wife or Xie. The daughters of the Wei clan eternally cannot be female candidates and enter the palace. This decree was breaking the upward road for the daughters of the Wei clan. Chu Qingju looked at the expressionless He Hong, smiled, and turned her head. Her gaze landed on Wei Zhu, who had collapsed on the ground. Drag her down, bestow 40 blows, and send her back to the Wei family. He Hong gripped Chu Qingju's hand, coldly ordering, in the future, if there are candidates that walk in the palace where they shouldn't, all will receive a beating of 40 before being thrown out of the palace. A woman that had been sentenced to a beating by the emperor before being sent out of the palace. She wouldn't ever marry in this lifetime. Chu Qingju watched as Wei Zhu was dragged out by the Taijian and sighed. I just went from being an unfavored daughter to being the empress, but so many cannot tolerate it. To get this kind of person to slander you in front of me, they think me an idiot. He Hong caressed the silver hairpin in her hair, his tone unusually warm. Don't waste any attention on these people. Come, accompany me for a nap. Chu Qingju smiled. With Emperor here, I won't waste any attention. Emperor is brilliant and wise, peerless through the ages. Zhen's peerlessness, isn't that also yours? He Hong smiled, his mood light as he took Chu Qingju back to the back hall of Tianqi Palace. As to what had just occurred, Qingju had such a good man as him. Would she think of any other? Qian Xian and Mu Jin stared at each other, seeing the same moved emotion in the other's eyes before silently following. The female of the Wei family was thrown out of the palace? He Yuan kicked aside the Taijian that was rubbing his knees. These days, he often had to go to Shokong Palace to pray for Xindi, so his knees were already bruised. Bin Wang's brother is so infatuated with Empress that he could even tolerate this kind of thing. He smiled coldly. He does have good skill. Such a short amount of time, and he has managed to control everyone at court. Gao Duo, standing under him, heard the words and hesitated before asking. Wang Yi, the circumstances are stronger than the people. Why don't we stay still now and wait for a good opportunity? Good opportunity? He Yuan snorted. By now, the people of Bin Wang have been almost completely suppressed. Lao Da's people have already stood on the new emperor's side. Among the advisors of Fu Huang, Tianjin Ku and Luo Chongqing have tight connections with the empress. They naturally would do their best to support the new emperor. As to the kind of people like Wei Wenguang and Lu Jinghong, the new emperor doesn't have to do anything, and they would be the new conservative fraction. Fu Huang's abdication decree was written in front of the senior officials, and he did the seal himself. What good opportunity do you think Bin Wang has? Gao Duo didn't think Rue Wang would see the situation so clearly. He hesitated before suggesting. Since that's the case, Wang Yi, why don't you help the emperor with his affairs? Then the emperor wouldn't directly attack you. The kind of person He Hong is, on the surface, he would make it more beautiful than anyone else. If he attacks, not many can compare to his ferocity. Originally, He Yuan was a very proud person. But after 2 short months, he was so beaten by reality, half of his pride had gone away. Even if Bin Wang submitted to him, he wouldn't be very close to Bin Wang. Even more, Bin Wang doesn't want to fawn over him. He coldly twisted his mouth. Bin Wang just doesn't want to see him well. Gao Duo silently glanced at He Yuan. To keep going even with nothing at stake, what was he thinking? What should be done with the Wei family? He asked uncertainly. The love between the emperor and empress is stronger than gold. The Wei family's tactics are just embarrassing themselves. If they beg aid from Wang Yi, what would you do? He Yuan sneered. In the beginning, it was them that asked Bin Wang to help. They were stupid themselves and mucked up. It has nothing to do with Bin Wang. Finishing, he summoned He Fu Air. In the future, if the Wei family shows up, don't receive them. Yes, He Fu Air noted it down and hesitated for a second before reporting. Wang Yi, the Chu Si Fei and Shi Su Yuan is seriously ill. Should an invite be sent to the Imperial Hospital for a Tai to examine Si Fei? Wang Fei is responsible for such matters. Why ask me? He Yuan impatiently waved his hand. It was clear that he didn't have the person of Shi Su Yuan on his heart. He Fu Air understood. It had been because Wang Fei didn't do anything that he had taken a bribe from Yao Shi to beg Wang Yi. From the looks of it, that one in Shi Su Yuan had lost favor. So he wouldn't have to waste any more time for Shi Su Yuan in the future. Gao Duo, as a subordinate, when he heard a matter of the Wang Ye's Ho Yuan, he naturally closed his mouth. Only after He Fu Er left did he interrupt. Wang Yi, this one heard you have a Si Fei that is the sister of the Empress. Is it this one? He Yuan didn't understand Gao Duo's meaning. It's her. But the Empress didn't have good relationships with the Chu family, so this Chu sure wasn't useful. Gao Duo smiled. If that's the case, then please forgive this subordinate to say something overstepping the bounds. Wang Yi, you should not treat Chu Si Fei too well. Otherwise, in the eyes of others, they would assume that you were feeling unjust on behalf of the Chu clan and the emperor would have more reason to target you. He Yuan waved his hand, dismissing. Just a plaything. Ben Wang isn't at that point to waste so much effort on her. Gao Duo smiled as he raised his hands. Wang Yi is wise. /N. Chapter 92 Karma Zhuzi. Yao Shi's eyes were red as she helped Chu Yu Su sit up on the bed. Then she turned to bring over the medicine bowl, which was steaming due to the temperature of its contents. Drink the medicine. Chu Yu Su leaned weakly against the headboard. As she took the medicine bowl, she saw Yao Shi's burned hands and grimaced. It's me who has dragged you down. All these years you stayed with me. When did you ever have to do this? Even if she didn't see it with her eyes, she knew that the medicine had been brewed by Yao Shi on her own. Now that Wang Yi didn't come to her rooms, and Wang Fei targeted her at every occasion, even the servants in her yard dared to steal and cut corners, pointing at the mulberry and cursing the locust tree, much less the kitchen people. Zhuzi, what are you saying? Yao Shi forced a smile and hid her burnt hand back into her sleeve. Drink the medicine and after a night, it will all get better. Thinking about what chief steward he had just said, she almost couldn't keep the smile up. Now that even Wang Yi wasn't willing to help Zhuzi, how would they live? Chu Yu Su finished the medicine in a few mouthfuls. Seeing Yao Shi's state, she sighed. Yao Shi, do you remember my father's birthday banquet held 5 years ago? Yao Shi took the empty bowl from Chu Yu Su's hand and minutely shook her head. It's normal that you don't remember, but it remains fresh in my memory. Chu Yu Su grimaced. That year, I accidentally broke a porcelain in Father's room. That day was Father's birthday, and breaking something was unlucky. I was very scared and purposefully got someone to lure Dejia into Father's room when she heard. Yao Shi remembered. She recalled that after Lao Ye's birthday, he had been so angry that he slapped De Xiaojia on her face and sentenced her to stand in the yard for a whole night. After that, De Xiaojia became seriously ill. Foreign wouldn't get a doctor to see De Xiaojia. If it hadn't been that the Tian family had sent someone to deliver something to De Xiaojia probably would have died that year. She hadn't thought that the matter had been connected to Zhuzi, and even more, she hadn't thought that her Zhuzi would have such tactics at such a young age. She hesitated before remarking. Newbie remembers that De Xiaoj nearly died that year. Yes, almost gone. At that time, I was afraid and guilty. She coughed. But she lived. If she hadn't lived, then it would have been me who would have married into Duan Wang Fu. Yao Shi's hand, which held the bowl, shook. She looked at the sickly complexion of Zhuzi and supported her to lie down and tucked the blanket in. She comforted. Zhuzi, you're sick. Don't talk nonsense. Newbie will go see if there is something to eat. As she came out of the room, she released a long breath. She still remembered Mu Jin painstakingly begging Zhuzi to beg Foreign to send for a doctor. At that time, Zhuzi's face was full of helplessness, and even used the reason of filial piety to refuse Mu Jin. Afterwards, Zhuzi had sent her to give some pills to De Xiaojia and never mentioned it again. She had never expected the truth of the matter was actually this. She rubbed her arms, feeling cold in the hot summer day. Isn't that Yao Shi? A Yahuan wearing green saw Yao Shi come out and hollered. Is Chu Si Fei well? Our Zhuzi has missed her. Not well yet. Thanks to Yin Yang for thinking of her. Yao Shi's smile wasn't pretty. This Yahuan was one who served another Yin Yang. Usually, they didn't have much interaction. But now, even a personal Yahuan of Yang could mock Zhuzi. Such a hot day? It's such a pain to endure. The Yahuan's tone suddenly changed. I heard that when the Empress hadn't yet married, she had been abused by her family, don't you think? What it's like now, isn't it karma? She saw Yaoxi's expression change and smiled. Clapping her hands, she remarked, the heavens have eyes. People who do evil things don't have good endings. The green-clad Yahuan bowed slightly. I respect you for being a loyal servant, but think more for yourself. She turned and left. Yaoxi looked at the Yahuan's back. She gave a helpless smile and went on her original path to the kitchen. The news that the Wei family's female candidate had broken palace protocol during the mourning period for Xindi and was expelled from the palace by the emperor quickly became the joke of Jing City. The Wei family had some reputation in Jing, but now, they'd lost all honor and didn't have the courage to even leave the house. The female candidates had gone through countless rounds of elimination. Originally, they were people who had a chance to be given to other members of the imperial house, or to be taken into the Hogong to serve. Due to the passing of Xindi, aside from the imperial house that had to observe mourning, even the common people couldn't marry for a month. But that Wei family, they'd thought to let their daughter capture the attention of the new emperor during the mourning period. Why didn't they think of the emperor's personality? Was he a lusty person? Even more so, the love between the imperial couple was known by everyone in Delong dynasty. Was the Wei family's daughter more beautiful than a goddess? From where did she get the confidence to break into the imperial gardens? The second day after Wei Zhu was sent back to the Wei family, she was sent by the Wei family into a nunnery. The reason given was that she would cultivate morals and pray for Xindi and the emperor. Everyone knew that this was the Wei family pulling a cloth to hide themselves. The emperor had already sent down the decree. The daughters of the Wei family couldn't enter the imperial house. This Wei family was over. The 3 months of mourning passed by quickly, but He Hung still followed the protocols of mourning, paying close attention to his attire. This caused the world to praise the filial piety of the emperor. But not matter what, according to tradition, He Hung was now allowed to take new concubines. However, everyone in the Hogong knew that the emperor had no intentions of entering the Hogong. The 6th day of the 8th month of Qing to 34th year was the most auspicious day in the near half-year as calculated by the imperial astronomers. The Ziwei star and its pair were bright, and it had the influence of the phoenix raising its head. So it was the most appropriate day for the crowning ceremony of the Empress. The Empress crowning ceremony was a very momentous occasion in Delong dynasty. First, sacrifices would be offered to the heavens and prayers would be recited. Next, the emperor and empress would bow to the ancestors to notify them that this woman was one of the imperial family. Then the emperor would personally put in the phoenix hairpin personally for the empress and draw on her brows. Lastly, the empress, wearing the phoenix robe, would receive the bows of the royal court officials and the noblewomen. In front of the copper mirror, Chu Qingju wore the phoenix robe that the weavers had rushed to make in 3 months by working day and night. Though the layers of clothing looked complicated and majestic, it didn't feel very heavy on the body. The outermost wide-sleeved, floor-length phoenix robe didn't have any gold or pearls, but it was so beautiful that it blinded everyone's eyes. As she watched He Hung solemnly draw on her brows for her and gently put the phoenix crown on her, she gave a smile. Once they finished everything, they clasped their hands together as they walked to the high platform. On the platform were the dragon chair and the phoenix chair. Dragon on the left, phoenix on the right. Chu Qingju stood in front of the phoenix chair, slightly raising her chin to look at the hundreds of officials under her, and watched as those people simultaneously knelt down towards her. Emperor, Wan Sui, Wan Sui, Wan Sui, Empress, Qian Sui, Qian Sui, Qian Sui. And then it was the 3 bows and 9 kowtows. Chu Qingju stood side by side with He Hung. Looking at the scene before her, she felt strangely exhilarated. Rise, the minister of ceremonies called. Music? The music sounded slightly solemn yet light. Chu Qingju didn't really know what song it was, but looking at the reactions of the officials as they stood with bent bodies, she could guess that it was a very high standard for her crowning ceremony. After the music stopped, Chu Qingju and He Hung sat down at the same time. Then it was the officials' turn to bow, one by one according to their ranks. Then it was the titled women. Just to watch people kneel to her, Chu Qingju sat for more than 2 hours. After the people finished, He Hung spoke. Today is the Empress crowning ceremony, and also the year that Zhen ascended to the throne. To accumulate virtue for the Empress, the world would be especially pardoned. Those banished would be reduced 60 miles, those in prison reduced 1 year. Those on the death sentence will be delayed 1 month to their execution. The people under shouted the Emperor and Empress were kind, and would be lucky for 10,000 years. Chu Qingju hadn't thought that He Hung would pardon the world at her crowning ceremony. Even though it was customary for the new emperor to pardon the world after ascending the throne, but waiting for today to announce the decree, it was too. She turned to look at the person beside her and smiled helplessly. Even if the Empress crowning ceremony was done extremely grand, but the ceremonies for Hung Fei and the others were much simpler when they followed. Hung Fei's was still all right, but the other 3 couldn't compare to the occasions when the Shindi's consorts of equivalent rank were promoted, especially Ping Kairan. It was absolutely unbearable to see. If it wasn't that the Empress bestowments also came down that day, almost no one in the palace would have known that it was the day that she was officially titled. For people, what was worse was not being ignorant, but being able to make comparisons. All those in the palace were intelligent, and they could all see what was happening. This Ping Kairan not being favored by the emperor was a certainty. Since the emperor didn't care for her, would they be willing to flatter her? Feng Zijin finally knew just how difficult palace life could be. The food delivered each day was cold. The tea was old, and not of good quality. If something was lacking or needed fixing, it was extremely difficult for the Department of Internal Affairs to come remedy it. She had fought and complained, but in the end, she found that what was sent to her became more and more terrible. Sometimes they wouldn't even send anything. After these months, she finally knew what was the servants bullying the masters and the torture of the deep palace. Zhuzi, Han Liangdi has come. Xiaoyan quickly walked into the room, her expression unpleasant. Feng Zijin grimaced as she stood. As she came out of the inner room, she saw Han Qinghe drinking tea as she sat on the chair. Her steps paused. She walked in front, bowing and made a greeting. Pinky greets Han Liangdi. Please stand, Ping Kairan. Han Qinghe smiled as she examined Feng Zijin. The other was wearing a slightly worn dark dress, completely devoid of the arrogance she once had in the Fu. She put down the teacup, wiping her mouth, and remarked, "Your tea is too bitter. I'll have someone deliver some new tea to you tomorrow." Feng Zijin declined. "There's no need to trouble Han Liangdi. We can't have that." Once upon a time, Mimi wouldn't drink anything at Wangfu except the Longjing before the first rain. Now that you have entered the palace, you can't deny yourself. She stood, asking, "Today's sunshine is great. Why doesn't Kairan accompany me on a walk?" Knowing that she was intentionally making it difficult, Feng Zijin could do nothing except to follow behind Han Qinghe. Han Qinghe gave a cold smile as she walked at the front. In the past, when Feng Zijin humiliated her, she had been even more ruthless. What she was doing now wasn't really anything. Thinking about it, Han Qinghe turned back to look at Feng Zijin, the smile on her face growing wider. In the future, there was still more to come. The humiliations she had suffered, she didn't suffer them for nothing. Chapter 93. An old case. Because the mourning period had passed, the flowers placed in the imperial gardens now red and purple. Han Qinghe looked at the beautiful imperial garden and thought about when she'd entered the palace as the daughter of a common and good family to become a candidate. She had then been placed by Empress Dowager Wei to serve at the side of the emperor. In a blink of an eye, 5 years had passed, and she was now one of the mistresses of the palace. As the palace maids passed her, they bowed to her. She enjoyed the feeling as others bowed their heads to her, as though if it was like this, she could forget her low birth and the unhappiness of the past. Turning back to see Feng Zijin blindly following behind her, she revealed a satisfied smile. Walking the imperial gardens, I would think of the times I'd accompanied Ping Kairan in the Wangfu. Feng Zijin didn't speak when she heard the words. She expressionlessly looked at Han Qinghe before slowly moving her gaze away. From Ping Siren's expression, it seems that you don't like walking in the garden with me? Han Qinghe sneered. Or is it that Ping Kyren thinks herself higher than me? Liangdi is high up in the sky. Pinky is only a small 7th grade Kyren who doesn't dare look down. Ping Kyren uttered coldly. Pinky is only listening to Liangdi speak. Han Qinghe was going to speak before suddenly hearing the sound of clapping behind her. Her heart jumped with joy, and she took a step to the side before kneeling down. Xie greets Emperor. When the dark gold boots walked in front of her, Han Qinghe's voice was sweet and soft as she lowered her head. But a second later, she saw a pair of gold-embroidered slippers appear next to the gold boots. She paused and then added, Pinky greets Empress. Chu Qingju looked at Feng Zijin and Han Qinghe as they knelt on the ground. This was the first time Han Qinghe used such a saccharine voice. She looked at He Hong, who didn't seem to have any reaction, and said, Stand. Thank Emperor. Thank Empress. Feng Zijin slowly stood. She raised her head to gaze at the Emperor but found the Emperor's gaze wasn't on either her or Han Qinghe's bodies. She lowered her face numbly, not speaking another word. Didn't think to encounter Emperor and Empress at such a place. Han Qinghe didn't want to give up the chance to show her face in front of the Emperor. Her appearance wasn't as good as Feng Zijin's, but she had a distinctive flavor when she smiled. It's Pinky who has disturbed Emperor and Empress mood. Chu Qingju looked at her blooming smile. Her lips curled, but she didn't speak. Since you know you disturbed Zhan and Empress mood, why haven't you retreated? He Heng's tone was icy. He looked at Han Qinghe, who was draped in gold and silver, his brows furrowing. Retreat. The smile on Han Qinghe's face froze. She didn't think the Emperor would not even take the slightest bit of care. She couldn't help but turn her head to look at the Empress and found that the Empress' expression hadn't changed from beginning to end, as though she knew that she would embarrass herself. She bowed in mortification. Xia asks to be excused. Seeing Han Qinghe retreat, Feng Zijin followed in leaving. Before she left, she looked again at He Hong and Chu Qingju, as though it was the first time she'd met them. After both of them left, Chu Qingju finally smiled as she remarked, Han Liangdi has served Emperor for so many years, but her appearance hasn't changed at all. Han Qinghe had been serving by He Heng's side since she was 16. Right now, she was just 21. In her previous life, it would have been the best years of her life. In this era, her age was slightly old. Really, Jin doesn't remember what she was like before. He Hong glanced in the direction of Fu Shou Palace. Don't think of those people anymore. Let's go eat in Mua's place. Fu Shou Palace knew very early that the Emperor and Empress were coming over to accompany the Empress Dowager for the meal, so they had prepared beforehand. When the two of them entered, Empress Dowager Wei was in the yard trimming twigs off a pot of flowers. Seeing the two of them, Empress Dowager Wei stood and led them into the room. After washing and drying her hands, Empress Dowager informed the two. Ijia had the small kitchen prepare the dishes you two like. Later, you can have some. It was bothersome for Muhu to remember. He Hong stood to bow to Empress Dowager Wei, but his posture was more casual than before others, clearly showing just how mutual the feelings were between mother and son. They should prepare more wine-pickled duck feet. All right, your duck feet, Xerxes' duck tongue. Ijia had them prepare. You won't be lacking. Empress Dowager Wei apparently liked her son's carefree and intimate attitude. She gave a sigh. Even though the mourning period has passed, there's no need to celebrate Ijia's birthday. Tomorrow, Ijia will send a decree declaring to not hold a birthday banquet this year, and won't receive the court officials' respects. When He Hong came here, he originally planned to discuss the matter of Empress Dowager's birthday, but he hadn't thought that Muhu was so straightforward. It wouldn't be good to hold a big celebration, but it might be too cold if she didn't even receive the court's respects. Ijia knows you are filial, but Ijia has thought this through before making the decision. Empress Dowager's expression became stern. Son, you have to remember, to gain something, you also have to gain the reputation, then your conduct would be spotless. On the side, Chu Qingju agreed wholeheartedly when she heard the words. If one acted, they had to act to the end. To receive both the gains and the reputation was the only way to become a true winner. But when saying such things, was it wise to speak in front of her? I understand Muhu's intentions. Hee-hung nodded. Then on Mother's birthday, us three will gather and have a good meal. Yes, Empress Dowager smiled. Her gaze swept across her Erxie sitting docilely by one side. For a family to sit together and eat, it's much better than having those useless things. This son of hers, to say that kind of a thing in front of her, he really had his heart on Chu Shi. With Chu Shi, there was no risk of the relatives. She was also the established empress. After Chu Shi had children, a fight for succession would be avoided. It wasn't a bad thing to have love between emperor and empress. Since Muhu isn't having a celebration, then we should also save on Erxie's celebration. Chu Qingju's birthday was in the next month. Her brows furrowed as she said, "It's always so noisy at a banquet, not that interesting. All right, we'll save on us mother and daughter's birthday celebrations, and we don't have to endure the torment." Empress Dowager Wei smiled, saying to Ding Mama, who was beside her, "It's almost noon. Get the kitchen to prepare to serve." Ding Mama left with her orders. Once she left the room, Ding Mama finally smiled and shook her head. Clearly the Empress Dowager and the Empress were two kinds of people, but they really did form a connection as they interacted. To have this kind of connection between Popo and Erxie in the imperial family, it was extremely rare. But the Empress was also talented. To be able to pout, play and laugh, and do anything else in front of the Empress Dowager, acting as though the Empress Dowager was her own mother. Thinking about the deceased birth mother of the Empress and the evil stepmother, Ding Mama sighed. The Empress hadn't had it easy. She must really be thinking of the Empress Dowager as her own mother. The three people were very happy as they finished the meal. Empress Dowager Wei watched Chu Qingju lean back contentedly in the chair, smiling and teasing. To eat 7/10 full is to cultivate life. Eating like you do is of no benefit to the body. Muho, Erxie is growing right now. I can't not eat. Chu Qingju giggled. If I'm not full, how will I grow my body? Empress Dowager Wei was amused by her words. She pointed at Chu Qingju. Yes, have to grow the body. After you grow up, you have to have grandsons and granddaughters for Ijia to play with. When she'd finished speaking, she couldn't help laughing herself. Hee-hung watched as his mother and Shifu get happier the more they chatted. He silently took a sip of the digestive tea. So even when his Shifu hadn't grown up, his mother was already preparing to play with his children. Was this scene really Popo, son and Erxie, and not wife's mother, husband, and daughter? On the second day, the Empress Dowager and the Empress sent out their decrees. The main meaning was that since Xindi had just passed away, they had no interest in enjoying their birthday celebrations and were grateful for the well-wishes from the people, etc., etc. Instantly, the court praised Shangmu Empress Dowager and the Empress for being virtuous and filial, and they were the epitome of what a woman should be. Hee-hung listened to the officials' praises of his mother and wife and added, Zhan's mother and Empress have no interest in amusements. Zhan, as the son of Xindi, also does not have the heart for the birthday celebration. This year, Zhan will not hold a birthday banquet. You all shall not persuade otherwise. Naturally, the officials urged and urged again, and then under the emperor's steadfastness, they helplessly surrendered. In the end, they hollered 3 times the emperor was filial. Both monarch and subjects were satisfied. Standing at the bottom, He Yuan gave a scornful smile. The way mother and son like to act. Even at this step, they didn't forget to act in order to achieve a good name. Shan has a memorandum. After the monarch and subjects enjoyed themselves for a while, the minister of the right, Wei Wenguang, stepped forward. Emperor, this official encountered a 13-year-old urchin a few days earlier on the road, felt that he was pitiful and wanted to shelter him, but who knew this official heard a great matter. The atmosphere of the court instantly turned tense. He Heng's brows slightly furrowed as he urged, Right Minister 1, quickly speak. This subject heard the urchin say that he had begged his way from Jiangnan to Jing. His father was a steward of a certain official in Jiangnan and had been killed because he found out that this official had colluded with His Highness Rui Wang and dragged his entire family with him. Thankfully, the urchin had been hiding out of naughtiness in the cellar of the home and his life was spared. He raised an accounts book with both hands. This is the accounts of the steward who had been killed. The little urchin, even under the struggles of the road, managed to protect this item. Emperor, please take a look. Once the speech came out, the court fell into silence. But no one dared to speak in defense of Rui Wang. Present it up, He Hung looked at He Yuan. Rui Wang, do you want to say anything? He Yuan sneered, raising his hands in a fist, responding, Emperor, Subject D is innocent. Right Minister Wei uses an urchin of unknown origins to accuse Subject D, and even made a fake account book. His intentions are enough to sentence him to death. He Hung took the book from the hands of a Taijian and randomly flipped open a page to take a look. With a calm face, he replied, What the truth really is, Zhen will send someone to investigate. In court, the officials realized that they didn't really know the emperor's true intentions. If he believed Rui Wang, then he wouldn't have sent someone to investigate. But if he didn't believe, then he should be in a rage. For the emperor to be this calm, they were at a loss. But smart people reacted very quickly. The emperor was going to settle the old scores of Rui Wang. Previously, the case of Jiangnan had been unclearly suppressed by Xindi. The emperor cared for the people of Jiangnan and naturally wouldn't pretend the matter didn't exist. Jiangnan was going to see a large purge. Chapter 94 Appetite Wide Open. The case of Jiangnan was taken up once again, but this time, no one begged for mercy for Rui Wang. The emperor didn't send an official of high position to investigate in Jiangnan, but sent down an imperial decree for the Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Court to cooperate in the investigation. Originally, some people had thought that the emperor would use the chance to take down Rui Wang, but who knew that he was doing everything according to the rules? He didn't seem to side with his brother, and didn't take the chance to settle the score with his half-brother. Many people were deeply moved by the benevolence of the emperor. Whether or not He Hung was really so generous, it wasn't very important to Chu Qingju. In the palace at the moment, she dominated above all, and she ate, drank, played, and amused herself greatly. The weather slowly moved into the fall, but her appetite became better and better. She preferred to eat sour and spicy food. One night at the end of the 9th month, she ate 2 bowls of rice, 1 bowl of hot and spicy fish, and 1 bowl of mushroom tofu fish head soup in one sitting. It was all home-style cooking, but she just liked it, and it scared He Hung into accompanying her on a walk of the gardens for more than 2 hours that night. Chu Qingju's birthday was the second to last day of the 9th month. That day, Empress Dowager Wei held a family banquet at Fu Shou Palace. Other than their family of 3, there was only Mu Hu Empress Dowager, Jin and Princess Royal, and Hung Fei present. The other 3 Fei Pin only kowtowed outside the palace doors before being excused to leave. Zhang Yongyu was the only one of the imperial concubines whose position was a first-grade Fei. Appearing at the banquet, she represented the generosity and virtue of the empress who was able to tolerate other women in the palace. But Zhang Yongyu understood inside what her identity was and what she should do. So after making her greetings, she picked the corner furthest away from He Hung to sit and quietly pretended to be a statue. After He Hung ascended the throne, he elevated the titles of Jin and Princess children. Everyone in Jing knew by then that Jin and Princess was on good relations with the new emperor. Of all the princesses of Xindi, only Jin and Princess position hadn't been affected, and the people in Jing still carefully flattered and respected her. It was human nature. One's father being the emperor or a half-brother being the emperor, it really was 2 different things. No wonder some princesses would pick a side on the matter of succession. Jin and Princess managed to make a correct decision. Those who had eyes all knew that when the new emperor was still Duan Wang, Jin and Princess had been extremely close to Duan Wang Fei. When the news that Duan Wang had been attacked, Jin and Princess had sent many herbs and medicine to Duan Wang. Didn't her actions clearly show Jin and Princess' position? The other person who benefited was Cheng Wang. Originally, he had been a pitiful little thing that his own father didn't care for. But now, he could be considered to be one of the most trusted people by the new emperor. His wife had connections with the emperor, so overall, His status was even higher than when Xindi had been alive. Empress, your appetite is so good. After the meal, Jean and Princess looked with amazement at Chu Qingju, who was wiping her mouth. A beat later, she commented, "Eating is good fortune. It's not that much." Chu Qingju took a mouthful of the digestive tea that a palace maid presented and looked in confusion at he hung beside her, asking, "Really too much?" "It's good you like eating." He hung smiled. He looked at the other's pale and smooth face, his fingers slightly trembling as he resisted the urge to reach out and pinch her face. He turned to order Ming He behind him. Today, the pickled cabbage fish head and kung pao beef tendons were made well. Who was the chef? Reward. Ming He noted the two dishes. He knew that it was the Empress who liked them and indicated for a Tai Jian behind him to go reward the chef in the imperial kitchens. Empress Dowager Wei raised the teacup to take a sip, smiling as she commented, "Recently, Qingju's appetite is getting even better. When Aijia sees her eat, Aijia feels the appetite improving and can eat an extra half bowl." Hearing this, Muhu Empress Dowager smiled and teased, "Mimi and Empress good appetites, even I at Chongming Palace have heard of. Even the imperial kitchen is thinking all day of creating new pastries and dishes in hopes of receiving your favors. It seems that our mother and daughter's gluttonous reputation has spread." Empress Dowager Wei smiled at Chu Qingju, completely uncaring of people in the palace spreading such news. She said to Muhu Empress Dowager, "Jie, we have known other for more than 20 years. When Xindi was alive, we were always cautious and alert. Now that our children have grown up, we don't need to live so cautiously. In this time that we can still eat and drink, it's better to enjoy it." Muhu Empress Dowager hadn't thought Empress Dowager Wei would say such a thing. She paused slightly before smiling. "You're right. A life is short and hard. We've endured for more than half a lifetime. It can't be put to waste." She and Wei Shi had no conflicts of interest. Now that Duan Wang had ascended the throne, he had treated her well. Even Jean and Princess, who had been recorded under her name, was the most important among the princesses. Right now, she was only an idle Empress Dowager. What did she have to worry about? Chu Qingju listened to the sisterly-like conversation between the two Empress Dowagers. If one didn't know, they really wouldn't believe that the two had once served the same man. The words basically meant, "We finally made it through. Let's enjoy ourselves." But as the two chatted, the topic unknowingly skewed to land on Chu Qingju. Muhu Empress Dowager looked at Chu Qingju's waist that never grew thick no matter how much she ate. "Today is Empress' birthday. It's not good to let a Tai take the pulse. But it's fine for a Tai to take a look tomorrow. If too much is eaten, it might harm the stomach." Her words were very euphemistic, but inside, she was suspicious of another matter. What kind of person was Empress Dowager Wei? When Muhu Empress Dowager's words came out, she knew what the other hand meant. She quickly calculated in her head. The passing of Xindi was the end of the 4th month. The end of the 7th month was the end of the mourning period. After the mourning period ended, Chu Qingju was still living in the back hall of Tianqi Palace. Hunger hadn't gone once to any of the other women in the palace. It was the end of the 9th month now. 2 months had passed. Was it that? The two Empress Dowagers were experienced and knew to not casually say their conjectures. Otherwise, if there was first hope and then disappointment, it was harmful. The two exchanged a glance. Empress Dowager Wei said, "Since Jejia has said this, I'm worried now as well. Why don't we have a Tai take the pulse tomorrow?" Chu Qingju felt helpless. After entering the palace, even though her body didn't have any ailments, the Tai would take a pulse every 2 weeks. They had also prescribed some tonics. She really didn't like drinking those things. He Heng's eyebrow slightly twitched. He then smiled, promising, "Since both Muhas are worried, this son will summon the dean of the Imperial Hospital tomorrow to take the pulse for the Empress." Chu Qingju put down her teacup, interjecting, "The weather turned cold lately, so I couldn't help but eat more. There shouldn't be any problems, but I should not cause both Muhu to worry." Empress Dowager Wei smiled and sighed. "As long as you are all well, us as Muhu will be comforted." Chu Qingju's heart moved slightly. She wasn't stupid, so she could hear that the majority of Empress Dowager's words were sincere. As a popo, Empress Dowager Wei was really very good. Not even in this era. In the place that she lived in her previous life, a popo as fair and considerate as Empress Dowager Wei was rare. Thinking about how she and Empress Dowager Wei had interacted, from the mutual probes at the intimacy now, Empress Dowager Wei tried to do the best for her as the Erxi. Even when He Hong had given out a decree that was more of a love letter to announce to the world and not going to the Hogong after the mourning period ended, Empress Dowager Wei had never been discontent with her and treated her even better. Muhe's words have made Erxi ashamed. As the younger generation, as long as you have healthy bodies and are happy, it makes us happy. Chu Qingju spoke with a smile. With a Muhe so concerned with Erxi like this, it is Erxi's good fortune. Empress Dowager Wei stilled. Then her voice was soft as she said, "Stupid child, even now as Empress, you make Ijia worried." At one side, Hong Fei listened to Empress Dowager Wei's words. Her heart was also full of admiration. When the Empress had just entered the Fu, the Empress Dowager had been somewhat dissatisfied with Empress. Yet now, the Empress Dowager treated her like she was her own. From beginning to end, He Hong had a smile on his face. Even as they left Fu Shou Palace to return to Tianqi Palace, the smile on his face didn't dissipate. His good mood maintained itself until morning court. When he heard officials suggesting he take a few female candidates as concubines, his brows wrinkled. Some certain officials didn't put any attention all day on state matters, didn't do any work, and their attention was entirely focused on the matter of his Hogong. Such subjects, what was the use in keeping them? Emperor, now that the mourning period has passed, your Hogong is empty. This subject thinks that the Xuannu should be taken as fei to expand the Hogong. An official in the Ministry of Right said, "This is a critical matter of continuing the line. Please, Emperor, make a decision." The words seemed like they were urging He Hong to take fei. In reality, they were saying that the Empress was childless and wanted him to take other women to have children. The kind of emperor that was He Hong, he wouldn't listen to this spiel. If this person was speaking on behalf of the people, he might have felt that this person could be used. But this person was criticizing the matter of the women of the Hogong. He Heng's face was cold as he looked at the rights official. Are you meaning to criticize that Zhen's empress has no son? Or implying to Zhen to let other Feiping give birth to the eldest imperial son? This official of the Ministry of Rights nearly bit his tongue. He clearly only had been urging the emperor to take concubines. How did it become slandering the empress and scheming about the imperial heir? He apprehensively knelt down. This subject did not mean that. Please forgive, Emperor. It was the orthodox way for the D-son of the Middle Palace to succeed the throne, unless the empress really couldn't have a child. He wouldn't dare to imply for the emperor to let other Feiping give birth to the eldest son. Wasn't that heretical? The empress has been married to Zhen for not even a year. Before, she had to observe mourning for Xindi, and then she had prayed for Xindi every day without pause. Such a virtuous empress, to be marred by you in such a way, it is abominable. He Hong uttered, as an official, the heart should be placed with the people and not to put the focus on Zhen's Hogong. Does everyone here like other people meddling in their Hoyuan? Or is it that some people believe they can arrange everything for Zhen and make the decisions for Zhen? As the words landed, the entire court followed in kneeling down to ask for mercy. In this world, who would dare to make the decisions for the emperor? Wasn't that the great crime of treason? He Hong gave a cold snort, looking at the people kneeling below. Xindi hasn't passed for a long time yet. Even though Zhen used months to substitute for years to come out of mourning, but every time Zhen thinks of Xindi's appearance and voice, it still hurts. There is much less interest to take other women. You all are scholars, and naturally know what is filial piety and righteousness. To respect the elders is filial piety. To be responsible for siblings and wife is righteousness. If filial piety and righteousness cannot be achieved, how is one a human? Emperor is enlightened. Himing shouted. Emperor is enlightened. This subject is ashamed. Luo Chongqing and Wei Wenguang simultaneously clamored. The others followed in shouting the emperor was enlightened. No one dared to argue with the words, otherwise, wouldn't they be the person that wasn't filial or righteous? As to that official of the Ministry of Rights that suggested for He Hong to take other fei, He was so frightened his face was pasty white and trembling. The officials on either side of him silently took a step back from him to distance themselves even more. He Yuan looked coldly at He Hong sitting on the dragon chair. The unshakable love between Emperor and Empress, it really was an eyesore. Chapter 95. Pregnant. The emperor had become angry at court. The officials underneath were all shaking, but some were very envious of the Tian family. To have this kind of niece, it was really the good fortune from the previous life. He Yuan still attended court, but due to the case of Jiang Nan, he didn't have much power to meddle in other affairs. Hearing the officials beside him discuss the relationship between the imperial couple, he revealed a scornful smile. In this world, how many men had a love as deep as the ocean, and how many emperors could be like the Yu Ming emperor of the previous dynasty? Before the He family took the country, the world was ruled by the Tong family, and Yu Ming emperor had been a rare good ruler in the previous dynasty. This person had done something that was famous in the world. That was, his palace only had his empress, and no other woman. Many people had written their own versions of the love story between Yu Ming emperor and Zhao He empress. The stories were happy or sad, touching and wistful, but in all of them, they praised the infatuation of Mingyu emperor and his wisdom, as well as the virtues and intelligence of Zhao He empress. People always had a shortcoming. The rarer something was, the more they liked to tell of it. The fact that there was so much written about Yu Ming emperor and Zhao He empress, wasn't it because an emperor's true love and monogamy were rare? Thinking of it, the smile on He Yuan's face grew wide. How many Yu Ming emperors were there in this world? After He Hong left the court, he started to walk towards the rear hall of Tianqi Palace. As he walked, the coldness on his face retreated to become warm. When he reached the entrance to the rear hall, it seemed normal. The Taijian guarding the door saw him, and was going inside to report before being stopped. Ming He, go pass on Zhen's decree. Summon the dean of the imperial hospital to take the pulse of the empress. He took the step into the door as he finished. Chu Qingju felt that as she traveled into this era, her hobbies became more and more elegant. Reading, calligraphy, flower arrangement, pruning, poetry, painting. She had done all of them. It was a pity that she could never have a sustaining interest in any of the hobbies. Disinterestedly looking at the bonsai that had been trimmed by her into a mushroom shape, she sighed. There's nothing to play with this bonsai. Mu Jin knew that the empress was bored. In the Hogong, aside from the Feipin and noblewomen coming to pay their respects, it was the people of the Department of Internal Affairs coming to ask about the matters of the palace. After a time, it wasn't interesting. Empress, Newbie saw the chrysanthemums in the imperial gardens have bloomed. Why don't we summon some noblewomen into the palace to keep you company and admire the flowers? It would pass the time. Mu Jin suggested. This way, it can also decrease the distance from you to them. Chu Qingju sighed. No wonder when she had searched for historical information in her previous life, there would always be some woman riding a horse, woman toying with a cat, and scenes of parks and kickball. It was because an idle life was too one-note, and the crowds of Miss Perfects needed to find things to pass the time. But the relationship between the empress and the wives of the officials was important. The emperor was the boss of the men of the world, therefore the empress was the boss of the women of the world. If there weren't any interactions, it wouldn't be right. A light, Bin Gong knows. 3 days from now, summon the wives above third rank into the palace to attend a banquet to admire the chrysanthemums. Chu Qingju pondered for a second. If there are unmarried daughters in the family, they can bring them as well. Yes, Newbie will go to let the female official announce the decree. Mu Jin wholeheartedly plotted for Chu Qingju. Any matter that was advantageous for Chu Qingju, she would cleanly and nimbly do, and wouldn't leave any blemishes. Just as she turned, she saw the emperor walk in. She quickly retreated to one side and knelt down, proclaiming, Newbie greets emperor. Chu Qingju heard Mu Jin's voice and raised her head to see He Hong walk over, still wearing the gold dragon-patterned robe that he wore when at court. She stood, meeting him and asking, Emperor, why have you come right now? When I got off from court, I remembered that a Tai was being summoned today to see your pulse and came to take a look. He held her hand to sit down on an armchair at the side. Seeing the bonsai that seemed to be almost bare, he smiled and remarked, "Just now on the outside, I heard you want to have a banquet. Is it because the Hogong is boring?" Chu Qingju smiled, a bit duller than at the Wang Fu. "But it will slowly get better. It probably won't happen this year, but next year, I will take you out." He touched her, sighing. "If you are really bored, you can summon Tian Foreign in to talk with you. Don't shut yourself in." "All right." Chu Qingju felt that the other thought of her as a lonely and weak white flower. She smiled helplessly, responding, "Emperor doesn't have to be so worried. I'm the Empress. If I'm bored, the servants would naturally think of ways to make me happy." He knew that what she said was true, and a grimace appeared. Treating her like this, he really couldn't rest his worries. This was what it felt like to have your heart tied up with someone. A while later, Ming He came in to report that the dean of the Imperial Hospital had arrived. Chu Qingju saw a 60-something man come in wearing the official uniform of the Imperial Hospital. A fine sweat was on his forehead. He must have hurried over. Otherwise, in this early autumn, where would the sweat come from? Subject Dubai Zhu Shu greets Emperor, greets Empress. It was possible to know from the name that he came from a family of medical practitioners. Chu Qingju silently examined the Tai. His cheeks were red, his hair was salt and pepper, but his overall energy was good. He must have taken very good care of his own health. Du Tai doesn't have to be so courteous. You have been in the Imperial Hospital for many years and very experienced. Recently, the Empress' appetites have increased. Come to take the pulse of the Empress and see if there are any ailments. He looked at Du Baizhu kneeling and indicated for him to come near to take Chu Qingju's pulse. When Du Baizhu heard the two words increased appetite, he paused. Then after thanking, he bowed and walked in front of Chu Qingju, holding his hands up and apologizing. "Empress, subject offends." Finishing, he took a silk cloth from his sleeve to place over Chu Qingju's wrist and started to take Chu Qingju's pulse. 5 minutes later, Du Baizhu switched to his other hand, and then Chu Qingju saw his expression become joyful. Du Baizhu took away the silk cloth over Chu Qingju's wrist, his face full of joy as he knelt in front of He Hong. "Congratulations, Emperor. Congratulations, Emperor. The Empress has a slippery pulse. It is a happy occasion." Chu Qingju's eyebrows jumped. Slippery pulse. Did he mean she was pregnant? Really? He who didn't usually express his emotions, asked in surprise, "Can you tell how many months?" Because the pulse isn't very evident, it shouldn't be more than a month. Unless a Tai had practiced for many years, it would have been unlikely to detect the pulse. Du Baizhu's face was full of delight, as though he was happier than anyone else that the Empress was pregnant. But at the same time, he didn't forget to compliment himself. Good, good. By this time, He was grinning from ear to ear. He waved his hand. "Reward, heavily reward. This subject thanks Emperor, thanks Empress." Du Baizhu gasped at his luck inside. The Empress' pulse wasn't evident, but it was definitely pregnancy. This time, he really showed his face in front of the Emperor and Empress. If this matter had occurred with Xindi, he would have been shuddering with fear. But now, the Hogong was managed by the Empress and the Emperor only favored the Empress. He had nothing to worry about. It was a very good thing. From today onwards, you don't have to attend anyone else, just serve the Empress. He mused as he barely managed to suppress his joy. From the Imperial Hospital, you can pick 2 trusted people to be your assistants. The diet of the Empress, Jean will get a pregnancy mama to pay more attention. If there is anything that cannot be used, you have to tell the pregnancy mama. Jean requires you to guarantee that Empress and the child in her stomach will be absolutely safe. Chun will not fail Emperor's trust. Du Baizhu gave a kowtow. Wealth could only be found through danger. If he could serve the Empress well this time, his status in the Imperial Hospital would be unshakable. After Du Tai left, Chu Qingju finally looked in disbelief at He Hong. "I'm pregnant?" The palace maids and Tai Jian in the room were all kneeling with happy faces as they gave their congratulations. For them, the fact that the Empress had children, it was a good thing to them. Only when their mistress was well would they, as servants, be well. Yes, you have our child. The smile on He Hing's face hadn't disappeared. His hand cautiously touched Chu Qingju's belly. As though afraid of harming the child, he quickly jerked his hand back. Tomorrow, I'll pick a useful and trusted pregnancy mama to serve you. Don't worry about any other matters. I'm there for everything else. Then the affairs of the Hogong, I'll hand over to the two Muhu. Chu Qingju wasn't attached to the power of the Hogong. Even more, with He Hing's heart here, she would always be the first in the Hogong. If He Hung didn't treat her well, it was useless even if she kept a grip on the power of the Hogong. Right? I have to tell the two Muhu. He Hung thought, take a good rest. I'll be back quickly. I'll eat the noon meal with you. Chu Qingju gaped at He Hong as he rushed out of the room, appearing to float in the air. She shook her head in helplessness and then gave a faint smile. Empress Dowager Wei and Muhu Empress Dowager had been chatting together when they saw the emperor rush in. They were surprised, but seeing that his face was full of joy, the two were very happy and also smiled. Muhu, just now. The Taiyi took the pulse and found Empress is pregnant. He Hung was happy and sketched a bow to the two. This son is coming to announce the good news. It had been a long time since Empress Dowager Wei saw her son forget appearances. She even felt that her son's eyes had become brighter. Her heart warming, she smiled, replying, since that's the case, you should be keeping Qingju company. Us here, it's fine to let someone else report. This son was just too happy and forgot. He Hung curbed himself slightly, but from each strand of his hair to his feet, jubilation was written in large font. This son has also come to ask a certain favor. Ijia had expected that you were here about the management of the Hogong. Hearing it, Muhu Empress Dowager smiled. Ijia had managed the Hoyong for decades and doesn't want to suffer again. If you care for your wife, then beg your Muhu. Ijia isn't willing to meddle. Hearing this, Empress Dowager Wei responded, Jejia is making things difficult for me. I haven't managed such things before. How about Mimi will temporarily work, but can ask Jejia for help every day? After our Urxifu has given birth, then let her manage herself. Us too, being Muhu, might want to be lazy but still have to care for the younger generation. That's fine. Muhu Empress Dowager smiled, agreeing, after our big grandson comes out, we only have to care about grandson. Naturally, He Hung gave his profuse thanks. As to the two Empress Dowagers expressing explicitly that they would only manage until the Empress gave birth, he understood the two's desire. Leaving Fushou Palace, He Hung got the Department of Household Affairs to present more good things to the palaces of the two Empress Dowagers to express his gratefulness. Empress Dowager Wei looked at the things that He Hung let others deliver and smiled helplessly. As a mother, she wouldn't bear to see her child in difficulty. The peace of the Hogong, to an emperor, it was an important matter. Chapter 96. The news that the Empress was pregnant quickly traveled from the Hogong to the court. On the second day, many officials' wives sent congratulatory messages to the rear hall of Tianqi Palace, expressing the joy the entire court felt towards the pregnancy of the Empress. Chu Qingju carelessly flipped open a note. The main idea was that the entire court heard that the Empress was pregnant and couldn't contain their joy, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and had to write of their joy, and wrote a whole pile of good wishes before finishing with greetings to the Empress Dowager, Emperor, Empress, etc., etc. The content of the messages weren't different, but what they expressed was the same. It was, us common people, we're happy today. Chu Qingju knew that the people had been keeping watch over her belly. If she gave birth to a son, it was the eldest son. In the future, even if the other Feiping had children, they couldn't shake the eldest son's position. Thinking of her body now, which was only 16, and was raising another little life, she felt complicated. And then she couldn't help but have another bowl of rice. The Empress Dowagers of the two palaces had already let the servants deliver a whole pile of useful and useless things over. Especially Empress Dowager Wei. She seemed to want to stuff the rear hall of Tianqi Palace full, sending over pile after pile of stuff. Chu Qingju started to wonder if Empress Dowager Wei still had anything left in her personal stores. Empress, Jean and Princess had someone send congratulatory gifts into the palace. Huang Yang held a list as he entered, which he gave into Chu Qingju's hand. Her Highness Princess Royal also said to wait until the flower banquet tomorrow to have a good chat with you. Chu Qingju flipped the list. The things listed avoided stuff that might cause trouble. It could be seen that Jean and Princess Royal had the intentions to become closer, but was worried of getting into trouble. Putting the list to one side, Chu Qingju smiled. Go tell the messenger. Say that Bin Gong will remember, and to let Jean and Princess come early tomorrow. Jean and Princess Royal and her. Originally, it had been half friendship, half beneficial. The way they interacted now, it was the best. Jean and Princess Royal might be female, but Chu Qingju felt that she was very decisive in her conduct. When she had separated from the Count of Beilu, she was unhesitating and didn't show any weakness. In the end, she had protected the reputations of the princess of the imperial house and captured titles for her children. In reality, if the Princess Royal and the Count of Beilu hadn't separated, her children might not have the same rank as they did now. After that, Jean and Princess expressed goodwill to He Hong and clearly distanced herself from Lauda and Lao San's family. The action seemed reckless, but it was much easier to obtain the good opinion of He Hong that way. No one liked people who backstabbed. In the very end, Jean and Princess Step was right. Now, she was the most free, most important princess, the Princess Royal, of all of Xindi's daughters. Even if she didn't have a Fuma now, Hu and Jing would underestimate her. A woman as skilled as her, it was no wonder that an emperor as unjust as Qing the Emperor was soothed by her to not care about traditions and make her the Princess Royal. Even Chu Qingju herself didn't think she could do as well. Empress, Cheng Wang Fu sent gifts. Empress, the Duchess of Zhongyi sent gifts. Chu Qingju spent the whole morning looking at different lists. She sighed. It wasn't an insignificant number of officials' wives that were qualified to send gifts to her. She didn't know how much had been just placed into the stores without a word. Empress, Rui Wang Fu sent gifts. The presents from Rui Wang Fu came relatively late. Chu Qingju had been preparing to use the noon meal when the people delivered it. She casually flipped open the list and was slightly shocked. Did Qin Bailu really prepare this for her? 1,000-year ginseng, Tian Shan snow lotus, 100-year knotweed, and so on. Things like cultivating bangles and other valuable objects had been stuffed in. When she finished reading the list, Chu Qingju felt that Qin Bailu wouldn't be this good to her. Something along the line wasn't right. Who sent this list? Chu Qingju folded up the list in her hand, her brow furrowing as she asked, Bin Gong has always been at odds with Qin Bailu. When has she been so good to me? Empress, you are the empress now. How can Rui Wang Fei compete against you now? Huang Yang responded. This list was personally sent by the steward of Rui Wang Fu, He Fu Heir. It shouldn't be wrong. Right now, the emperor is investigating the old case of Jiangnan. Rui Wang sending so much over. He must have other intentions. Chu Qingju just remembered that the court was in the middle of the case of Jiangnan. Rui Wang Fu sending so much over. Were they thinking for her to have some pillow talk? That was funny. She, an empress that the emperor put importance on, would be stupid enough, for just this paltry amount of stuff, to go beg for mercy for Rui Wang. Wasn't that was seeking suicide, being tired of living? The matter was overlapping with the court, so the servants attending Chu Qingju cleverly didn't follow up. This was a quality that Chu Qingju was satisfied with. In this world, no one liked other people saying things they shouldn't by their ear. In the imperial study of Tianqi Palace, He Hong finished reading the memorandum on the case of Jiangnan, his face grave as he drummed his fingers. A long time later, he ordered, summon the Duke of Zhongyi for an audience. Chapter 97 Overestimating Oneself at Court. As the speaker recited the contents of the investigation, the officials listened with wide eyes and gaping mouths. They didn't think Rui Wang would have committed so many crimes. Rui Wang, do you have anything to say? He hung calmly looked at He Yuan standing below. When Fu Huang was alive, he was extremely good to you. Why did you have to commit such major crimes? If Emperor wants to kill Subject D, then do as you wish. There's no need to talk so much. He Yuan did not beg for mercy. His face was full of scorn as though he hung. Sitting at the top was just a joke. If Fu Huang really cared for me, then I wouldn't be standing here today. By saying this much, you just want to proclaim me disloyal and unfilial. Zhen has never thought that way, He Hung sighed. We were almost born at the same time, and had played together as children. Zhen doesn't bear to kill you. Even more so, many of the acts were committed by your subordinates, and aren't seriously connected to you. He Yuan furrowed his brows and then sneered. He wanted to see how He Hung would deal with him. The officials looked at the expressions of the two brothers. On one hand, they were moved by the feelings of the emperor. On the other, they felt helpless at Rui Wang's arrogance. Rui Wang had been arrogant and despotic in Jing for many years. Even now, with such undeniable evidence, he was still so unmanageable. Passion's decree. Rui Wang exhibited unruly behavior and forfeits his salary for 5 years. He allowed his subordinates to smuggle salt and buy and sell official posts and titles. Zhen hurts at heart, but as Xindi once told Zhen to hold fraternal affection, Zhen doesn't bear to but still has to punish. From this day forth, Rui Wang cannot enter court, is demoted from Qin Wang to Jun Wang, deprived of his salary for 5 years, and will write a list of his own crimes to be posted on the city gates of all the regional capitals of Jiangnan. The wealth that was seized from the Jiangnan case will not be taken into the treasury. Zhen will personally send it to Jiangnan so it can be used to fix roads and construct bridges in order to benefit the people of Jiangnan. He Hung had a disappointed face as he stood. Qing can all leave. The emperor is wise. This subject asks to be excused. Everyone knelt to send the emperor off, becoming even more respectful of the new emperor. The emperor did not take Rui Wang's life, did not erase him from the imperial house's lineage. That was due to fraternal love. The emperor punished Rui Wang, used the wealth seized to construct infrastructure for Jiangnan, and asked for him to write his own apology letter to post on the gates of Jiangnan cities. It was so the emperor didn't want to fail the people. It really was a win all around, with no flaws. This move seemed to look as though it was protecting Rui Wang, but on reflection, it was actually stomping Rui Wang to the ground. A Wang Yi who couldn't attend court, a Wang Yi who wrote his own crimes to present to the world. He wasn't a risk and would become a blemish in history. In the future, people would most likely praise the emperor for being loyal and righteous. A ruler with such cunning, as subjects, they naturally had to be more cautious in their work. If they made the emperor angry, even in death, they may not have a good name. He Yuan quietly stood in the empty grand hall. The emperor on the dragon chair had left. The officials beside him had also left. He looked calmly at the surroundings. A long time later, he smiled lightly. To kill without a trace, as expected of my good brother. Your Highness, the little Taijian who guarded the great hall carefully walked in front of him and informed in a small voice, it's closing time. Looking at the Taijian whose legs were quivering, He Yuan smiled. What? Ben Wang is very frightening. The young Taijian knelt with a bang and started to kowtow, pleading. Forgive me, Wang Yi. All right, stand up. He Yuan didn't look at the Taijian as he walked to the doorway leading into the hall. When he turned back, he saw the Taijian was still kowtowing and laughed out loud. Don't be afraid. Ben Wang won't ever stand here again. The Taijian froze. A beat later, when he dared to look towards the doorway, he only saw the shining sun outside. Rui Wang had disappeared. He patted his knees as he stood, mumbling to himself. Still thinks he's the same Rui Wang, such arrogance. The Hogong was very busy at the moment because Chu Qingju had invited the wives of officials 3rd grade and up into the palace. Those who couldn't get out of the bed were the only ones in Jing who couldn't come. This was the first time the Empress had invited the titled women into the palace. No matter what the Empress was intent on doing, the people under didn't dare to slight her. Some thought that since the Empress was pregnant, She wanted to pick daughters from the families of officials to enter the palace as fey to serve the emperor. However, those who wanted to seize the opportunity took along the unmarried daughters of their family, and smart people came alone, unwilling to even mention their daughters. Which woman in this world wanted to find other women to share their husband? Disregarding the fact that the empress hadn't known she was pregnant when she had sent out the decree, even if she had known, based on the affection between emperor and empress, they wouldn't benefit if they sent their daughters in, and would offend the empress instead. They also should think about where the empress was living now. It was rumored that the emperor had disliked the smell due to the new renovation of Yuan Palace and specially made a decree that, until a month after the empress has given birth, she was not to move out of the rear hall of Tianqi Palace. The wife and the husband were living together. For a Chia to blindly interfere, wasn't that just begging for punishment? Chu Qingju didn't feel any different even though she was now pregnant. When she reached the imperial gardens in her phoenix carriage, the people who should have come had arrived. Once she got out, the crowd knelt. "Foreign, don't be so courteous. Please rise." Chu Qingju looked at the different varieties of chrysanthemums placed in the garden. She smiled, teasing, "Ben Gong has met you all before. Foreign, don't be restrained with Ben Gong just because the location has changed." The wives gave their thanks and sat down according to their ranks. Very quickly, Taijian started to place rare chrysanthemums onto the pedestal previously constructed in the middle for the women to see. Each pot of chrysanthemums would be brought up for a time, and then the next one would be even more beautiful. No matter if they were really amazed or just acting, they continuously gave their compliments, as though the chrysanthemums weren't of mortal hands and had been given down from the gods. Chu Qingju slowly drank a cup of date tea. She wasn't allowed to drink any other kind, not even ginseng. Red date tea was the only tea that was good for her and the embryo, so she had gradually started to change her diet. "This one is interesting." Chu Qingju pointed at a pot of flowers where the back was white and the inside was purple. She had once had such a flower, but she never knew the name. Because of her busy job, she never spent much time caring for it, and the flower, once it bloomed, wasn't as beautiful. "Empress, this chrysanthemum is called the fragrant young phoenix. Because the petals are as beautiful as a phoenix, so it received this name." The Taijian that had been holding the flower answered with joy. Originally, he had thought that this pot wasn't eye-catching and thus wouldn't receive the favor of the empress. Who knew that it was the only one the empress would ask about? It was a blessing from the ancestors. Fragrant young phoenix? Chu Qingju mused for a second. That's a good name. Mu Jin, reward. After seeing the empress admire that flower, the wives followed in complimenting it, making this somewhat commonplace flower become rare. This female subject has only seen chrysanthemums in the books. The plum blossoms are jealous of its fragrance. Today, borrowing the good fortune of empress to view so many chrysanthemums, it is really this female subject's luck. A girl wearing a light yellow short dress said in a moderately loud voice. The golden dragon leaping clouds was also extremely beautiful. Chu Qingju looked at the person who spoke. It was a girl, about 15 or 16. She had a simple shuangping ji, but that made her seem even more youthful. For Zhen, that jade phoenix cloud was the most beautiful. He hung, followed by a crowd of attendants, walked towards the direction where Chu Qingju was standing. He looked at the girl who spoke. "Whose family are you?" This female subject is the granddaughter of Grand Duke Jing. Qin Xiaoyun greets Emperor. The young girl saw the emperor inquire and stood with a calm face. She gave a full bow to He Hong. This female subject spoke nonsense and let the emperor hear a joke. Chu Qingju saw Qin Xiaoyun's elegant posture and gave a small smile. Wasn't Grand Duke Jin Qin Bailu's grandfather? Then wasn't Qin Xiaoyun Qin Bailu's sister or cousin? But the looks, the conduct, it was more pleasing than Qin Bailu. "En, you spoke too much," He Hung calmly concluded. "There's so many elders present, there's no reason for you, as one of the younger generation, to speak." Qin Xiaoyun seemed shocked that the emperor would say such a thing to her. She stilled, then with a normal expression, she responded. "The teachings of emperor, this female subject will remember in her heart." This conduct was much better than Qin Bai Lu. If a normal person had been admonished by the emperor like this, she would have been red all over. But she acted as though the emperor was teaching for her benefit. Chu Qingju sighed. It looked like the Qin family did have some women with high attack power. Qin Bai Lu and Wei Ran Lu's mother only counted as the failures of the Qin family. He Hung felt a bit surprised. He couldn't help but look again at Qin Chao Yun. She didn't seem to have deliberately dressed up, but her appearance gave others a feeling of elegance. It didn't stain the Qin family's reputation. When his gaze fell upon a pair of pearl-embroidered slippers, he took away his gaze, his voice even colder. Jean isn't instructing you, but reminding you. At the very least, you were born of an educated and noble family, so your conduct cannot stain the reputations of the noble families. Everyone could hear that the emperor didn't seem to like the Qin family. They remembered that Rui Wang's Wang Fei was a daughter of the Qin family and didn't have a good relationship with the empress. They instantly understood. This Qin family had married a daughter to Rui Wang Fu. The result was that Rui Wang fell. So they wanted to shove a daughter into the palace. They really did think everyone else was stupid and couldn't see what they wanted. Some of the foreign examined Qin Chao Yun's appearance and thought scornfully, just these looks, and she wanted to seduce the emperor. Could she even compare to a finger of the empress? The Duchess of Zhongyi, Tian Luoshi, took a sip from a teacup, uncaringly commenting, "The reputation of the daughters of the Qin family is good, but the rare ones who haven't learned well, it's of no benefit to their reputation." The people beside her, hearing it, instantly agreed, provoking the Duchess Dowager of Jing's face to pale in anger. He Hung didn't look at the women, turning to walk towards Chu Qingju. "Look at the time. The flower banquet should be finishing now. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.